Hello there. I hope you still are with us. We had some technical issues here in the start, but now I would like to welcome you to this talk show, our Climate Action Talk Show. 3 hours of interesting talks about everything that can be of interest when we talk about climate and the Nordics and the whole planet. We are the Nordic Council of Ministers, and we are here at the Nordic Pavilion in Glasgow at COP26. And we have a hub, a COP26 hub also in Helsinki. And I have my colleague André with me, or he is with us, straight with his guests in Helsinki. André, can you hear us now?
Yes, we can hear you. And let me say, Mary, you also look wonderful today.
Ah, that's very nice to hear.
And we hello, Glasgow.
And we hear you, so that's wonderful.
Oh, that's a wonderful start. And greetings from the capital of Finland, namely Helsinki. And as you may know or not, Finland holds the presidency of the Nordic Council of Ministers today. Or this year, and are therefore responsible for our work on how to achieve the goals set in our Vision 2030. And to know where we should go, it's pretty useful to know where we are. So therefore, the Nordic Council of Ministers has also made this baseline report. And before we start the discussion here, we're going to show you a short movie on what we actually found when we did our baseline report.
The Nordic countries aim to become the world's most sustainable and integrated region by 2030. They are on the path, according to a new baseline report that was commissioned by the Nordic Council of Ministers. But the report also outlines a series of challenges that the countries need to resolve.
If the best pupils in the class, the Nordics, cannot do it, then how can we expect China or India or Nigeria or Ethiopia or Brazil to do it? The Nordic region must succeed if we are going to have any chance for the world to succeed.
The Nordic Council of Ministers will focus on 3 strategic priorities: a green Nordic region, a competitive Nordic region, and a socially sustainable Nordic region. We know that climate change poses a big challenge. But in addition to that, one major concern is loss of biodiversity.
We have a very high density of natural reserves and natural parks and protected areas. But still, one should recognize that the Baltic Sea is one of the sickest inland oceans in the world. Overfishing, invasive species, challenges with agriculture, which still is in an unbalanced state where we are loading more fertilizers and having larger concentration of livestock than the sustainable assessments show is at the carrying capacity.
Near the Swedish town Lund, we find the Nordic Generic Resource Centre known as Nordgen. This is a Nordic partnership that works to conserve and promote the sustainable use of genetic diversity among animals, forests and plants that are important for the Nordics.
Vi skal tænke på, at biodiversiteten er så stor en del af vores samfund. For planterne for eksempel, de giver os ilt, de giver os mad, de giver foder og også mulighed for, at vi kan få tøj på kroppen.
We cannot claim that we have crossed the line of truly being on a pathway towards a true sustainable modern welfare. But it's a very exciting moment because there's so much happening in the Nordic on phasing out, particularly fossil fuels, that I think we are really seeing a turning point. This is giving quite an exciting modern welfare future that will give many benefits in terms of well beyond environment. But we still have a lot of work to do.
We still have a lot of work to do, the words from Johan Rockström there. And with me here on stage in Helsinki, I have group of experts, I would say, who will help us to shed light on how we are doing it, or if we are leading the way towards the green transition. Rina Pursiainen, a specialist at the Prime Minister's office here in Finland, and member of the Nordic Council of Ministers expert group on sustainable development. And Fanny Eider, senior advisor at the Nordic Council of Ministers. And I'm going to start this discussion with you, Fanny, and go straight to the core question. According to the baseline report, are the Nordics leading the way towards the green transition?
That's a good question. I would say yes and no, but maybe mostly no. The baseline report shows us that for the 3 strategic priorities that the vision has, it's the green Nordic region that is the major challenge for the Nordic region, whilst we are a fairly competitive and socially sustainable Nordic region at the moment. So we have a lot of challenges if we are really to become a green region. We have a high greenhouse gas. We have high greenhouse gas emissions, and that's decreasing a bit for the whole Nordic region. And then we have a high material footprint, which is actually increasing. We're getting worse and worse. And then we also have a large effect on other countries from our consumption, for example, with regards to emissions of greenhouse gas emissions. So, and to yes, maybe we are leading in a way because we have a lot of solutions and innovations in the Nordic region. We're doing well, for example, on sustainable energy, which is increasing over the years. And we have ambitious targets and so on. So in a way we're leading, but we're starting, or at the moment we have a really large impact when it comes to environment and climate.
And that has to do with our consumption and production as well.
Yes, absolutely. So we tried, or our ambition in the baseline report was also to look at consumption-based greenhouse gas emissions, which is the emissions that are caused by our consumption in other parts of the world. But at the moment, it's only Sweden that is doing statistics in a long-term perspective. Other Nordic countries are also doing that and increasingly doing that and trying to find out ways to do it, because it's also it's difficult to do these statistics.
I'm going to introduce you as well, Rina Pursiainen. Talking to you yesterday, you said that Finland has brand new numbers on Finland's carbon emissions. And how does it look?
Yeah, and especially about the household emissions and the consumption-based emissions, because you're right, we don't do that year to year. So we've been living in a little bit under a security blanket, thinking that, of course, they have had to go down because we've had so much talk within the last couple of years. But the latest data shows that in 2019, it was 47% of our household emissions that were created outside of Finland. And those we don't know everything because it's impossible. But the big picture was that the emissions that the average Finnish household produces consumption-based rose 4% between 2000 and 2019. So they are not going down, they are going up. But then we can, of course, try to spin it that our the amount of money that the average Finnish household has been using in consumption has rose more than 4% in this time. So we can see that there are some kind of that we can take the consumption without increasing the emissions that much, but I think that's not that big of a plus on our side.
No. We're going to take in Glasgow here as well, because Mary, I know you have some guests at the pavilion in Glasgow. Please introduce them.
Yes, I have two fine guests with me here. Aldis Mjell Hardadottir, you're former president of the Nordic Youth Council. Former, I say, because just a couple of days ago, actually, the new president was elected.
Yeah.
But last year, you had the role of a president there. So you're the politician on stage here.
Yeah, you could say that.
And then we have Truls Dam Christensen, you're head of the secretariat for a group called the Danish 92 Group. Could you just briefly tell us what that is?
Yes, definitely. The reason why it's called the Danish 92 Group is because it originates in the 1992 Rio conference. So what we are doing, we are a network of 25 environment and development organizations working on sustainable development and have been following all the UN processes like, for example, the Climate Convention and the Biodiversity Convention and so on.
Okay, now Aldis and Truls, having heard what was said in Helsinki and having knowing something about the baseline report and where we are now, what would you say, how realistic is the Nordic ambition to become the world's most sustainable region? By 2030, that is.
Yeah, well, without sounding like a huge pessimist, all over the report it's written that there are significant or major challenges that remain. So we only have around 9 years to meet the goals. So I think the real question is, what is it to be the most sustainable and integrated region? And are the societies ready for the changes needed in order to meet these goals? I'm not sure that the societies actually know how a sustainable or the most sustainable region looks like and what is needed for us to achieve that. Because we need to see huge systematic changes in our societies. And I wonder if we are ready for that, if the Nordic countries are even ready for that, and also within 9 years. So I'm not sure that I'm that positive that we will reach it, but we also need to know what this means.
What it is that we want to achieve, actually.
Yeah.
What would you say, Truls? Can we do it? And what is it that we should do?
I think we need to be a bit more specific on this because I think I agree a lot with what they said in Helsinki about our challenges, if you look at the Nordic countries, is not so much on the social issues, not so much on the economic issues, but on the green issues or the environment, climate issues. And I think the Nordic Council of Ministers have shown that before in reports. Other institutions have shown it very clearly. As a modern welfare system, we are quite well off on many of the SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals, that are linked to social and economic parameters. But when it comes to the green sectors, we are behind. And especially because of our global footprint situation. So our import, the things that were mentioned on our consumption and production. So the target 12 or the goal 12 in the SDGs on sustainable consumption and production is exactly where many of the modern countries are lagging behind. So for me, it's really important that we start taking the responsibility of it. And I think it's interesting to hear that, for example, that maybe Sweden is the only country that really has statistics on this at the moment. What we see in Denmark now, we got a climate law here 1-2 years ago. In that climate law, we actually managed to get what we call a global column with us as a global part of it, where we actually supposed to look at the global situation, because I think this is the next step in being a green leader. So the global part is really important, the green targets are really important, and we need to improve of that if we really want to be a green leader. If I can just add to that, okay, wait, but I can add to that just saying, for me, it's not just whether we will actually achieve being the most green region. It's also about a matter about how do we take leadership at the global level. And I think the Nordic bloc of countries have a unique chance of being a green leading bloc in the world, which is really, really needed. So I think that also links to the fact that what is the foreign policy of our countries? How do we actually try to improve the green development in the world, both through our consumption, but also through our green diplomacy and so our foreign assistance and so.
Andrea, I will give you the word just in a second, but I want to ask our politician here something, because we were discussing here the emissions from the households, and consumption to a great extent has to do with what happens in the households. But actually this is a huge political issue. And it's very hard to be a politician and take all the very hard and non-popular decisions that have to be taken. How brave are our politicians in the Nordics, Aldis?
Yeah, but that's actually what I meant earlier when I said that do we know exactly what we need to do, and are we ready for the systematic changes? And I think like if we're not ready for the, for example, discussions on agriculture. I had an interesting meeting yesterday with the head of the EU delegation, and one youth representative raised the question, are we ready for the discussion on agriculture? And he said, okay, I can't really answer that, maybe we're not. And if we're not ready to have the discussion, are we then ready to actually dive into the decisions and the changes that need to be done? So I don't know how to answer if we're brave enough. I want to believe that we are, and I think that the key to that is more youth politicians, and I'm not only a politician, I'm first and foremost a youth representative fighting for climate change or for like against the climate crisis. So I hope that we're brave enough, and we have to, or older generations need to open up like the spaces where not only the discussions are being made for young people, but also where decisions are taken. And I think there we have brave politicians, the young politicians, they are brave and they are ready to make the difficult decisions. So, yeah.
Well, I could continue on this for an hour, but I can see André waving there, and we have a very limited time left. So, André, you have a minute, then I will take one.
Thank you. I think Irina had some comments on what has been said from the stage in Glasgow.
Yeah, first and foremost, like, because I'm representative of a national government, I'm supposed to tell you that Finland was the #1 in Sustainable Development Index, so good job, Finland. But then when we go to the systemic level and then we take on the spillover effect, we will drop to 135th rankings, but not, and we weren't even the worst of the Nordic countries. But you were talking about systemic changes there in Glasgow, and one thing that we've been wondering in Finland is that we have already done a couple of systemic changes which have been working. The energy system has really been changing and helping us with our emissions. But the next systemic change is the cultural change, because if we can't change the culture around consumption and the way we are living our lifestyles, then we can't really expect us to have the next kind of technical systemic change, for instance, be it in transportation or in agriculture. So we need the cultural shift, and in there I think Glasgow was completely right that it's the youth movement and the NGO based movement that the governments really need, so that we have enough pressure.
One short comment, Fanny, and then we have to go to Glasgow.
Yeah, really important with the cultural shift. And we did a report a few years back that showed that in order to get behavioral changes, we need role models and examples to follow. And for example, there we have a lot of good examples of the youth living sustainably that we should work more with to inspire others, because that's the key in it, to see someone your neighbor, and then you change your behavior.
Okay, Andrea, that's it for you. You can't get more of the time now, because I want to hear from Truls, because we hear now both Aldis and our guests in Helsinki saying once again that we're hoping for the youth to be in charge, actually, to if you would be in charge, you would take the hard decisions. And I'm asking you, what do you think? Are we ready to give youth more decision-making authority in these questions?
But I think it's a bit simplistic, the idea that we'll just leave it to the youth and they will take care of it. I think that's a mistake. I also think it's simplistic just to say it's political leaders that have to agree. We're doing that all the time, I know. But actually, if you look at what we experience in Denmark now with the climate law, it is that on certain areas, it's easy to show political leadership. All the technical stuff that's easy to do. Windmills,
that people don't understand.
Windmills, electric cars to a certain degree, so on. We talk behavior change, they are afraid. The political level do not want to go up and, for example, impose something on food or agriculture or stuff. So I really think there we need a mixed pressure from civil society, industry, business sector, and a collaboration with the political level. I think that's the only way. We need to show the politicians that they can take these decisions and not be afraid of losing voters, because at the moment this is what we see in Denmark.
Exactly. Aldis, you have actually
Yeah.
the last comment here.
Yeah, I just want to say that we can't place all the responsibility on individuals. This has to be something systematical, and I don't think that it's that we only solve it by giving youth space at the decision-making table. But I also think that politicians should listen to the call, and they are calling, like civil society is calling for action now already. So I think that politicians now need to listen to the call and also give more space to young people at the decision-making table. And that's how we kind of can solve this.
So systematic and cultural change, and the politicians that listen very clearly to what society around them is saying. That's all for now. I'm sorry about the few minutes we had at our disposal. Thank you very much, and thank you in Helsinki. And we will actually continue with our next team, that is Just Transition. And over to you, Andre.
Yes, we are, and as in every talk show, we're gonna do a shift of guests. So my guest is coming in here, and the others is going out, and we are going to examine the path towards socially just green transition in the Nordic region, and how we secure this transition. And with us on the stage here in Helsinki, we have Tove Ahlström, director at Global Utmaning. And I hope we also have Anna Lundgren with us on Zoom. She's a senior research fellow at Norregio. I would be really happy if someone would tell me if we have Anna with us. And on the stage in Glasgow, we have Peggy Hessen-Følsvik, which is the president of the labor union in Norway, LO, and vice president at the Council of Nordic Trade Union. So if we have Anna with us, I would like to start with you, Anna. There you are. I'm so glad to see you. We're going to start with you because Norregio has a project examining just this, not just just transition. Anna, please tell us more about this project.
Thank you so much, and thank you for the invitation to this event. So we have a project. I work for Nordic, which is an institute for research in regional development under the auspices of the Nordic Council of Ministers. And in this project, we focus on policies for a just green transition. And this project was initiated and is also funded by the Nordic Council of Ministers. And it runs between this year, we just started the project, and until 2024. And in this project, well, firstly, as we are researchers, we will first try to disentangle a little bit what is a just green transition. Usually when we talk about the green transition, we talk about the technical aspects, we talk about the economic business models that are needed in order to see the green transition happen. But a just green transition also implies social aspects and spatial aspects. So first in this project, we will try to disentangle a little bit what is meant by these different concepts. And then secondly, in the project, we will try to understand how the green transition is perceived among the populations of the Nordic countries. And here we talk about the 5 Nordic countries and the self-governing territories of Faroe Islands, Greenland, and Åland. And we will look into how the green transition is perceived not only in the Nordic countries, but also in the regions and in different social groups. And in this project, we will particularly focus on what we call vulnerable groups And in this particular project by vulnerable groups, we talk about unemployed or those at risk of unemployment, but we also talk about elderly, children, and disabled. And we will do this through using a multi-methods approach. We will use surveys, we will use sentiment analysis, focus groups, etc. And we will also be in contact with those interest groups that we have for those groups that I just talked about. And they are knowledgeable about their target groups. So we think that we can learn a lot from them. And then thirdly, we will dive into the policies. So what is a policy for a just green transition, and how can we formulate policies that take into account those social and spatial aspects of the green transition, to make sure that we can formulate policies that are also not only going in the direction of a green transition, but also towards the direction of a just green transition. So that was very, very quickly what we're aiming at in this project that is called Not Just a Green Transition. And we have an acronym as for many of the projects, and we call it NJust. That could also be good to keep in mind if you want to look for further information about the project later on.
We would love to follow that project, Anna. And with us here at the stage, and Anna, please stay tuned and comment on what's been said on the stages, both here in Helsinki and in Glasgow. I'm going to go to you, Tove Alström. You are the Director of Global Utmaning. And earlier today, you had a discussion here in Helsinki on just this topic. Could you please enlighten us what came out of that? Or what do you bring with you from that discussion?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. The main things that I bring with me from the discussion this morning was that decisions that concern workers must be done involving workers. That's obvious, and that most important thing is learning and education and training and upskilling for preparing for the transition. We also had Frederick from the German Trade Union Confederation talked about their big their huge challenge, because they have 40% of their emissions from coal, and how they have been working together with collective bargaining to get the workers with them in the transition. So, I mean, to have this collective bargaining is a key influence to have the social dialogue and to have a positive outcome. So there shouldn't be a division between social rights and environmental rights. And we had a really positive discussion, I think. And in the Nordic countries, we have the solutions, we have the money, we have the means to organize a well and social just transition. It's possible. Yeah.
It's possible. That was kind of the most positive thing I've heard today, I think.
Yeah, but that
it's possible.
I mean,
but we're gonna take in Glasgow here as well, because there we have Peggy Hessen Følsvik, president of the Labour Union in Norway. Mary, please go ahead.
Hello, Peggy, and welcome. I wanted to continue from what we just heard about this morning's session from Tove. What do you feel is the most important role in the green transition for a labour union?
Well, a just transition has been one of the most important issues for the unions, not only in the Nordic countries, but also internationally, for quite some time now. And it's closely linked to the ILO program for decent work. And I think, as it was said very positively here in Helsinki, that we have absolutely a very good starting point in the Nordic countries, because we have our Nordic labor model where we have strong unions, we have organized the employers' side, and we have a tradition for a tripartite cooperation between the parties in this tripartite model, and with the governments with us. So as is said here, I think we have a very good starting point in developing policies for this transition.
Yes, the starting point is very good, but how, if you think about what the labor union usually does, you take care of the employees, and you, your main focus is on them and their rights. So when we have a situation as the one we heard Tove mention here, for example, with the coal industry, and suddenly there will be a huge loss of jobs. How do these two things correspond, the green transition and the rights of the employees?
Well, we have to make sure that we create jobs, that we grasp the possibilities that also are in the green shift. We have to create new sustainable jobs, and we also have to make sure that today's workers, who are in today's jobs, that they are able to have new skills, that we educate them also towards the new jobs that are coming. And we have to do that by bringing the unions into the discussion. And I think, as I said, the Nordic model makes that very easy compared to many other countries around us. But then we have to be at the table. And we are very positive in Norway, at least these days, because we just got a new government who has even put this in their new government declaration. And I know that also in the other Nordic countries, this is not new for us. This is how we built our societies and our welfare states. So we have to build on the traditions, the Nordic traditions, and also be part of the discussion on how to create new sustainable jobs in the future.
So we have a very, very positive note here, both in Helsinki and here in Glasgow. This is it's very optimistic actually to hear both you and Tove in Helsinki. Do you still have, Andrea, some questions for Tove there, or should we take in our other guests?
Should let in the young climate activists as well, because we do have, I know we have someone in Glasgow, and we have two of them here in Helsinki. Nina Rask-Skotte is one of them from Concita, Climate Ambassadors, and we have Benjamin Brink. Thank you. I pronounced that right. I was a little bit nervous. But anyway, when you listen to Tove here and the researchers and of course the labor union as well, are you as positive as they are? Nina, you may start.
It works.
There it works.
Well, I hope, I don't know if I'm that positive. It's great to hear, but I just want to start out by saying the representation here today is, of course, the speakers from the organizations, but what about the workers themselves? Why are they not standing at this table? Also, I think that there's already been a lot of ways where we have a lot of success stories in the Scandinavian countries when it comes to workers' rights and so on. But we also have to listen to the environmental rights and what do we weigh out more. And as you said, it's not a fight between those two. It should be a collaboration, and I believe it can happen. But it really takes a lot of education. It takes money, and it also takes knowledgeable citizens.
But do you think it's a fight today? Is it kind of a mismatch between the environmentalist rights and the workers' rights?
No, but I think it's a question of resources, right?
Mm.
So if I were getting my paycheck every single month and I was sure of getting it, and all of a sudden it would create a lot of uncertainty if I didn't know how that transition would be.
Mm.
So yeah,
Mm.
if that's an answer.
What do you think, Benjamin?
I also hope that my mic works.
Put it a little bit closer.
A little bit closer, okay? Is it working?
We
Yes.
don't seem to have sound in this mic,
Okay.
but if you just change the mic with Nina. Yes.
Am I now?
Yeah.
So I would say that I am hopeful, but not very optimistic in that sense.
Why?
Because if we look at the NDCs that we have now, we are still looking at 2 to 2.7 temperature increase. That is far from the goal of 1.5 that we set in Paris. So we're still, even though that we are elevating our national like NDCs, we're still far behind the goal. And one of our speakers today was saying that we need to listen more to the people. But I would say that in Copenhagen, there is the climate march happening right now. It's not only happening in Copenhagen, it's happening in many big cities around Denmark, and I'm sure also around the world. And there the message is loud and clear. It's both old people, older generations, and the younger generations that is saying, we want this transition. We want it to happen now. We cannot wait any longer. We also talked earlier about like, we need all these solutions already in place by 2030. What we're doing now is more talk in some way. We need to have more action that is actually driving us towards those goals, because it's going to affect everybody. It's not only us in the Nordic countries. Of course, we can be a leading force in this. We can take the leadership, as was mentioned earlier. But it's everybody that's going to be affected. That's why I'm hopeful, but I'm not very optimistic with what I'm seeing right now.
Tove?
Yeah, I think I really want to say that I totally agree with you. There is a huge challenge, but I'm optimistic that it will go. In the Nordic countries, we have the trade unions, and they are really powerful, and we know how to, and we are a wealthy economy, so we have all the possibilities to do it. But of course, IPCC is totally super clear that, I mean, the window of opportunity is like 5 to 6 years. We might even cross the Paris Agreement in the 10 to 20 years. So, I mean, the situation is super challenging. But I think that the Nordic countries, so taking down the positivity a little bit.
But Mary, I know you have some young people on the stage in Glasgow as well. The youth delegates on the climate.
Yes, from the youth delegates from Iceland and Sweden. Please let me present them. We have Finnur Richard Andersson from Iceland. You're the UN youth delegate on climate. That's what it's called officially. And you are the UN youth delegate on climate from Sweden, Fredrika Andersson. Welcome. And I wanted your comments on what we just heard, especially maybe on what we heard Benjamin say there about being heard. Yeah. You are, as youth delegates, you have the possibility to be really close actually to the negotiations here in Glasgow. Yeah. Do you feel that you are being heard?
Yeah, I think, well, first of all, thank you for having us on the panel. Very appreciated to get to voice our opinions, and coming back to what was mentioned earlier about, yeah, we're in an urgent situation. We're heading for 2.7 degrees, and linking it to the previous panelists, the Nordic region is not taking enough leadership when it comes to this. And yes, we get a very privileged position as youth delegates to be very up close with the delegations themselves and lobby to a certain extent through what we say and our sort of emphasis. But yes, so we're being heard, but we need to be more than heard. We need the decision makers to make the decisions based on what they hear from us. So at the moment, there's a lot of listening to youth. It's increasing, which is a positive development. But then on the other hand, when it comes to the negotiation rooms, I've now been following for a week within the rooms. It's a lot of old people and no mention of youth. Our emphasis are not being taken into the decision making. They're not being taken into account. And I think it's as much as it's important to focus on a just transition for current workers, it's also about realizing the fact that current youth and future generations are a massive stakeholder in the climate crisis. It's super important to have them in mind, just as it's important to have the labor unions in mind in the decision making.
Yes, Fredrika, I can see you nodding here. What do you want to add to what Finnur just said?
No, I think Finnur said it very well. I think we absolutely have been advancing on how much we involve youth. Just the fact that there are youth representatives, it's great. I can see in the Swedish delegation that some of our recommendations are taken into account and put into the positions. But it's mainly those issues as more youth inclusion, more climate education, better rights for indigenous people, for human rights, super important issues, but not on the issues that's actually about climate change. We've been saying for so many years, repeating those recommendations, that, okay, you need to curb emissions now, and you need to do that through a just transition, but still we see emissions continuing to grow. And I think what we are lacking in youth inclusion is the follow-up mechanism. You need to, when including youth, having a clear plan for how those recommendations are actually going to be implemented. Because now youth are starting to grow tired of the political system because we're saying the same things, but we see no results. And I think that is a huge challenge also for democracy.
But how could this implementation or follow-up system be built? I mean, now you're here, and what I hear now is something that some people would call greenwashing. You are here and you are heard, but then you can't see the results. But how could we build up this follow-up system that you're asking for?
I mean, it is youth washing. That's what we call it. You take nice pictures with us, and then it looks like you're taking action. I do believe we need institutionalized youth involvement. We need to have a broad representation via national youth councils. And when I understand the challenges of just listening to one group. We have to listen to workers, we have to listen to indigenous people too, and to all the ones who are voting for the politicians. But I think that at least when you can't take a decision, you need to explain why. You need to be able to give that understanding and see, okay, but that is an issue you can push, and not just receive the questions without giving an answer. I don't know if you want to add something.
I think Peggy wanted to comment on what you were saying.
Yes, I'd just like to remind us that today's youth are tomorrow's workers. And the youth percentage of members in our organization, in LO in Norway, is about the highest as it's ever been in our country. So youth very much have a voice in the labor movement, and not only in Scandinavia or in the Nordic countries, but also internationally. And if there are no jobs for youth in the future, I don't think that's a solution either that any of us can live with. So we have to make sure that there are jobs in the future, that there are sustainable jobs, and that we have the right education, that we give people the right skills to really be able to take those jobs and to develop it. And I think also that the Nordic governments have quite strong goals for the next few years. We have in Norway made the decision that we're going to reduce our emissions by 55%. That's quite an ambitious number. And that means both developing technologies, it means developing new green jobs. So we have a lot of different issues that we have to work together with if we're going to reach those goals. So and that's why I'm optimistic, because we have this Nordic model where we can do this job together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Fredrika, you wanted to comment.
I think this is super interesting, and I agree with you on many issues. But I also want to add, when we talk about green jobs and the just transition, I think something completely or very important is thinking many of those green jobs already exist. We have so many jobs that are low carbon jobs that are not thought as the ones that we're going to transition to, such as teachers, nurses, health workers, all of those jobs that we also could do the transition towards already, because as we heard earlier in this panel, we also need to rethink the SDG 12, the consumption and the production. So I think there's also an interesting point.
I can see André getting nervous over there that he won't be heard. We can't hear you. We can't hear you. Yeah,
I would appreciate if someone had their headsets on so you actually hear us. But anyway, we have some comments here, and I think Benjamin was the first one out, and then Tove.
Yeah, I'll just come with a very, very quick comment about why should we even listen to youth, because it's exactly, we have this youth washing that is on the rise in some sense. We have more and more corporations and so that are paying, to have the youth included, but they're not really listened to. So to answer the question, why do we need to listen to the youth? We are the first generation that is going to feel the effects of climate change on a daily basis, but we're also the last generation to do anything about it. That's why if we're thinking of this as a dinner table, we're not only supposed to be invited to the dinner table, but we should be asked, what do we want to eat and what should be in the food? And that, I hope the trade unions can be part of this sort of asking exactly what is it that we want to see the jobs of the future be, and then allowing the young people to have a voice through them.
Yeah, thank you. I really, the thing that Fredrika also said, but Benjamin also. So I have this same frustration that you have. And I saw our think tank is based in Sweden, and I thought we have a really nice goal on carbon-free, fossil-free on 2045. And we have a lot of initiatives, like we could do this in transport, we could do this in the petrol industry and everything. But there was no holistic plan. So I got really, and when I actually understood that even not the politician had a plan, a roadmap forward. We started actually in 2018. It took a lot of time to get financing to do the job. But then we took whole of Sweden territorial emissions, and then we made a plan on how to get down, and if we could get down to net zero. And actually we can go down to net zero, yay! So, and now we have taken this analyst report and give it to the government, and they said that this was in Swedish en grundbult, like a major cornerstone in the transition to Sweden fossil-free in 2045. But I mean, if the holistic plan is not there, I don't know how it is in Norway, Denmark, Finland, Iceland. Do they have a holistic plan? Because a nice goal is only a nice goal. You have to do the action to get down. And we have the positive with the very, very powerful trade unions that can be a major part of the transition. So that is a positive way of getting down. But do we have a plan? Sweden has one now.
We have one comment also from Nina.
Yeah, it's a comment to what you said in Glasgow from the organization.
Trade union or
no,
labor union?
Labor union.
Mm-hmm.
You said today's youth is tomorrow's workers, and I just want to point out that we are also people, and we are also people who want to live in a planet that is fossil free and that have a holistic plan. And I don't know about other Scandinavian countries, but in Denmark, over 50% of the people who can vote are over 50 years old. So it's really important for us to sit at the table, select the food, what's in it, because we're not just workers, we're also people who want a planet to live on.
It sounds like you're sending a message to the labor union. If you want us as members, please change politics.
Maybe.
Andrea, can we continue? Because we have just 2 minutes left, and I have at least Peggy who wanted to comment here. So Peggy, you have like 30 seconds each.
Yes, okay. I'll just say that later today we are going to launch an initiative from the ITUC, which is the worldwide labor union, where we are going to have tripartite councils in the countries that will sign up to this declaration. So we're going to launch that today for the Norwegian government for Norway, and I know that also many of the other Nordic countries will do the same, and I'm glad to say that also many other countries in the world. So we will make a plan. We'll make a good plan.
Fredrika.
I just want to highlight the importance of this discussion because climate change is such an unequal issue. It really is a double-edged sword as well, because the climate crisis in itself affects those most vulnerable in such a horrific way, but also when we postpone acting on climate change, the transition, which is going to be needed, is going to have to come so much faster. And in those transitions, the most vulnerable are always the ones affected the hardest. We could see that in the pandemic, and I'm afraid to see that in the climate transition that is needed. The common solution for that is a just transition now. The just transition is the one that starts today.
Do you have something? Because that was a very good ending line.
Yes, that was a very good ending. I just want to add that if we're going to say that we're listening to the youth, 55% reductions by 2030 is not enough. That's what the world average has to be, and if the Nordic countries want to be the leaders, we have to go way further than that. So I just wanted to leave us with that even though the countries themselves, the government say they're ambitious, they're nowhere near enough ambitious. And I'll end with the fact that now we're leaving to a protest.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you to Finnur and Fredrika and Peggy here in Glasgow, and to Tove and let me see now, Nina and Benjamin in Helsinki. Thank you. And we are moving on to our next theme. That will be food, actually, that was mentioned on stage, especially in Helsinki. What will we have on our, and Anna, thank you to you as well, I forgot you. But we're going to talk about food now, what should be on our plates. We were supposed to have Mats Fredrik Fischer-Möller with us here in person in Glasgow, but things happen and people get on the wrong trains, as did Mats Fredrik. He was supposed to come to Glasgow, but he's apparently going somewhere else. But we think that we have him with us on Zoom. If I can see him soon, I will present him for you. Mats Fredrik is a professor at the Edinburgh University, and there he is on the train. Now let's hope that the internet is strong enough on the train so that we can hear you. Mats Fredrik, can you hear me?
I hear you perfectly, Marty.
Oh, that's very
Mary?
good.
No.
That's perfect. Andre, is it okay if we start here in Glasgow with Mats Fredrik? Yes, I hope you're saying yes, because I can't hear you. But Mats Fredrik, could we start with you telling me about how you would define the role of food and food systems in the green transition?
Yes. Well, the role of food is big, first and foremost. There's no doubt that we need to transform our food systems quite substantially. Food is the second largest emitter of greenhouse gases, and also the largest cause of biodiversity degradation on top of that. So in a green transition, food cannot be ignored. And I can be outraged and optimistic about the role of food in these negotiations. It's, of course, easy to be outraged and say, well, there isn't nearly enough talk about food at COP. There's nothing on food in 90% of the nationally determined contributions to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. Food hasn't been part of the climate solution as set out by the UN system. And that is despite the fact that we see eat plants, we see protests, we see calls for meat reduction in all the citizens' assemblies. So a lot of people see food as key to solving the climate crisis, but it's still not in the proper documents. I can also be outraged at our governments across the world tell us that we don't need to change substantially the way we eat food and the way we produce food. Food have for a long time been given a pass. In Scotland, if we put in place all the recommendations that the Scottish government want when it comes to meat consumption, meat reduction, methane reduction from meat, we'll still only reduce emissions by 35% of where we are today. That means that even after we put in place all the recommendations and all farmers adopt to them, meat will still be 65 times more emitting than falafel. So we can do some things within the system, but we also need to break the system, break our dependency on meat, and think differently about food. We have for too long, politicians have given cover to food, told food that we don't need to change. And that means that we are now behind some of the other sectors in the green transition, and we need to act even faster. But I'm also optimistic, because when I was at COP 4 years ago, I only saw 2 food-related events, of which I co-organized one. Here in Glasgow, we have a lot of talk about food. Arguably the 2 largest agreements coming out of this COP, one on methane and one on land use and forestry, are specifically targeting or can be solved by digging into food. So food is coming up the agenda. And we also had a UN Food System Summit 2 months ago, where for the first time ever, all the world leaders met and talked about only food. And it's clear that they want to have a just food system, they want to have a healthy food system, and not least a food system that is emitting less climate gases. So the agenda is starting to pick up. We don't see the political commitments yet, but the agenda is clearly showing that change is happening. And I'm very optimistic also looking at how our food culture can be rapidly changing. We heard earlier that cultural change is the most important systemic change. Well, the food culture can change and is changing faster than we've ever seen before. So there are reasons to be optimistic, and that's even before politicians start to act. If the politicians start acting too, God knows how far we can go in 10 years.
Okay, thank you, Mats Fredrik. Please hang on there, because we will get back to you. But now I'm giving the word over to Andrea and your guests in Helsinki.
It's always lovely to see Mats Fredrik being really upbeat and engaged. Thank you, Mats Fredrik and Mariam. With me here on the stage in Helsinki is Nora Backlund, which is ombudsman at the Young Farmers at the Central Union of Swedish-speaking agricultural producers in Finland. That was the longest title I've ever read. But anyway, welcome, Nora.
Thank you.
And we have Will Lafleur, which is a doctoral student at the Helsinki Institute of Sustainable Science. And let me start with you, Will. Seeing this really enthusiastic and quite outraged as well. Do you feel as outraged as Mats Fredrik?
Yeah, actually, I was a bit surprised. Well, let me say that again. The fact that, for example, food was very underrepresented in previous COPs. What Mats said, only 2 food events were happening 4 years ago. So on one hand, that's outrageous. But on the other hand, it makes sense, because fundamentally agriculture, the way that agriculture is structured, the way that food systems are structured, they fundamentally shape the possibility of what societies can do. So the reason that we can have a really fast-paced world and a fast-paced society is only because of the food systems that we've built. And one reason that I would imagine that food systems people don't want to talk about them is because changing the food system radically will radically change everyday life experience of how we live in our world. And this is a very big problem for vested interests all over the world. And for me, I believe it's one of the strongest reasons why food has been rather hush, but it's one of the most urgent actions that we can take.
And one of those who actually need to maybe change a little bit to make this transition is the farmers. And Nora Buckland, when we talk about sustainable food systems, farming and meat production tend to get blamed. How do you, as a young farmer, see that?
Representing young farmers, I think it's important that when we blame farmers or when we talk about the food transition of food, it's important to know the origin of the food and how it's produced in different places, and take the local context in consideration, and also remember that we are paying a really or it's really cheap, the food we are buying, and it's hard to make an income on the food as it's now, and then also to make it more environmental friendly, or do more climate actions at the farm costs a lot, and it needs a lot of investment. So I think it's hard for the young farmers to hear about this, because they don't probably see the economy, or they don't have the possibility to do the investments that would be needed to do a transition.
So what we need is economic incentives, as in a shift in the subsidies, and also we need new politics.
Yes, and we need to appreciate the food more.
Should we pay more for it?
Yes, I think so.
Will, what do you think?
Yeah, food is way too cheap. And it brings to this issue of the idea of competitiveness, being competitive in the transition in the Nordics. I mean, if we're talking about competition, it really matters what kind of competition we're talking about. In food sectors, competition means that farmers who are growing vegetables here in Finland, for example, are having to compete on a marketplace where food is super cheap, and most of the costs are not coming to the consumer, but they're absorbed by the climate, and that leaves farmers who are doing really regenerative agroecological practices out in the cold. They're going out of business. They can't make money because they can't survive in that kind of climate.
I see Mary here wants to raise a question.
Or actually,
Mats Fredrik as well.
I wanted to give the word to Mats Fredrik, and then I have a question. But first, a comment from Mats Fredrik.
Yeah, I think definitely food is too cheap, and in our part of the world anyways. But we also have to acknowledge in some of these discussions that and I think I'm doing that too, we can tend to create conflict that doesn't need to be there. We don't really get a lot from the polarized debates that the food debates oftentimes can be. I think it's really important to say that it's not really, we can't really blame the farmers for the status quo. The farmers, of course, can sometimes want to maintain status quo, but predominantly we need the policy structure to change that enables farmers to do the right thing. And what I really would like to see, and what I see starting to emerge, is that some policymakers are starting to say, well, the future is not the same as the past. We can't just continue to grow what we've been growing forever and expect that to be profitable. So we see increasingly, not least the European Union Farm to Fork strategy and some of the national strategies coming, that the policymakers are saying, okay, we need to go in this direction. So just to say, we can't blame the farmers, and we also need to make this just from the north to the south, because food systems are differently. And if we just say, well, we are great at producing in the north, well, then the optimal solution would be to export all of our meat to the south. And we've done that in the ages, and we completely destroyed their food sectors. So the good thing is that we will need food. It's not like oil where we need to invent some new jobs. And linking back to just transition, we can produce food differently. We just need to put in place some new structures. And if they can be policy supported, that'd be great. If they aren't policy supported, then maybe the market forces will force farmers to do it rapidly. We can already see that lab-grown meat is increasingly becoming cheaper and cheaper. Plant protein is readily available. I'm not quite sure I would like to invest in a farm producing meat for the next 15 years, because I'm not sure the market is there. So the policies can be adopted to smooth the transition in the right direction, but food will always be needed, and hopefully we can even appreciate it even more and pay more for it in the future.
Okay, but let's me now. I have a question. You were mentioning this with the north and the south, and actually the Nordic region, the north, is rich, and we can afford both developing, inventing, and implementing new ingredients and forming new systems and changing our policies. But is this something that only we can do? I mean, how can we help the poorer south do the same investments and changes that we should do?
I lost connect.
Okay.
I just lost connection for like 20 seconds there, Mary. Just the last part of the
okay,
question. So the north and south.
How can we help the south do the same changes that we do?
Well, the good thing is sometimes that actually part of the south are eating better, eating more the right thing. So we could take inspiration from, for instance, India, in order to adapt our diets. So it doesn't have to be a north is giving and south is taking discussion. Oftentimes I've seen that some of our tools that's working in the Nordics, for instance, when it comes to partnerships that
Okay, now we're losing the
now
train connection. We lost him there, and that's unfortunate, but that can't be helped. André?
Well, that
yes, I think we have some points here as well, because when I talked to you yesterday, Nora, you said that farms and farmers is not a homogenic group, and the farming or agricultural production here in the Nordics cannot be compared to other parts of the world. Could you elaborate on that?
Yeah, and also farming in the Nordics or within our country or in a region can't be compared to each other. Each farm is different from the other one, and each field is different from the other one. So you can't, when talking about agriculture or farming as and changes and emissions and so on, you can't just see them as one group. You have to take in consideration that on some fields the emissions are higher, and the techniques you can use or the crops you can grow on different fields differ. So it's, you can't just talk about farming or agriculture, or not even in the Nordics, not in the region, because it's a big difference between from one farm to the other one.
But Will, do you still think we are or should kind of change the way we produce food in the Nordics as well? Is it possible when you listen to Nora here?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think that it's possible, and I definitely think that it needs to change. I mean, in the Nordics, you know, the food system that has come to be now is modeled on a food system that is not old. It's rather new. It's only 70, 75 years old, and that food system in globally produces, you know, more and more research is coming out to show that this industrial food chain system only produces about 30% of the calories that we actually consume. And in fact, in the global south and what's called the peasant small-scale farmer food webs and indigenous food webs, where about 70% of the food and calories that we consume, and those food webs also produce much greater agricultural biodiversity. So when I don't think it's really a question of what the North, whether it's Nordics or whether it's North America, can do to help the South. I think rather there's a lot to be learned from the kinds of food webs that exist now in the South that we need to learn how to do here in the North.
Like Mas Fredrik said earlier on.
Our time is up.
Yes, Mary.
I'm sorry, our time is up. We need to wrap this up, and I need to say thank you very much to to Mats Fredrik. I could see you waving there, but I'm sorry, there's no way we can take you in anymore. And I want to say thank you very much also to Nora and to Will and to André in Helsinki. And André, you will present our next speaker. Thank you very much.
Yes, I will. Thank you. You may leave the stage now because, ladies and gentlemen, I have the pleasure of introducing a professional Finnish explorer and award-winning keynote speaker, Patrik, or Pata Degeman, as he is known. He's a passionate climate activist, and here he is. We're going to play a video that introduces Pata. So play the video.
It's about minus 40.
A hell of an introduction, and Pata, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Andre, and hi, Mary, and everyone who is following this stream. During the years of traveling around the world, I've seen some beautiful areas, beautiful nature, also quite interesting cultures, which have been sometimes quite colorful. We once went to climb a mountain in Himalaya and walked along a river towards the base camp, and sometimes our trail then continued on the other side of the river. So we had to get over using these suspendable bridges. Can you see the pictures over here now, or can you show the pictures? Yeah, let's see if this one moves forward. Okay, this is on, it doesn't work. Could you please press it forward? And we walked along this river and used these suspendable bridges to get over, and pressed a couple of times more. Okay, very good. And there was a bridge over there that looked a bit old, and we came to the left-hand side. And I asked one of the porters that how old is this bridge? And he looked at me and said that, Mr. Pata, not to worry, can you skip a bit backwards even now? And he said that it's only 200 years old. And he definitely looked like 200 years old. So I asked him, is he strong enough for us to walk over? And then he told me that, yes, no problem. They have strengthened it last week. And it didn't look like it. So I asked him, how did you strengthen it? And then he told me that they'd attached to the handle all the way over completely new prayer flags. So let's go. It's good that you believe in what you're doing. At least these guys believe in these prayer flags. And during the years, I found out that it's also good to believe in something else than only these prayer flags. For example, good planning, good communication, efficient teamwork, and definitely to trust in hard and cold facts. For the last 28 years, you can see the pictures over here from different kind of expeditions. So I've been traveling pretty much in the polar areas. 47 times up into the Arctic on different expeditions to the Greenland, Spitsbergen, Alaska, and so on. And then also down to Antarctica 7 times, to different deserted islands, jungles, and mountain ranges. 9 of these expeditions have been to areas where nobody's been before. And even if nobody's been in these areas, we still have seen some crazy and radical changes in the nature. So I was asked today to show you a snapshot around the world what the polar areas look like at the moment. This picture is taken in Greenland. I have a small house in Greenland. I bought it about 10 years ago to be able to monitor the climate change in the fjord of Särmilik. And at that moment when I took this picture, it should have been all iced up. But the sea ice doesn't even come there now during the winter times, which means that the dogs that they have over there, the sled dogs, they cannot run in the ice anymore. And pretty much, well, most of them are dying at the moment over there, which is really bad in the small villages. And also the polar bears are pretty much disappearing much more north. The problem is, of course, that you probably know that there aren't any ice on the fjord over there, and the sun rays won't reflect up the atmosphere. It would just go straight up down into the black water or dark water and warm it up even more. This is a video actually that a group of scientists made from Ilulissat, West Greenland. And it's pretty cool because they took a time lapse of a glacier that moves straight out into the Atlantic Ocean. For us to see how it really flows down little by little like this. And it just goes there 24/7. And this one glacier on West Greenland produces about 20 million tons of ice every day into the water. And that is only one glacier in Greenland. There's several glaciers on the west coast and the east coast that are producing every day this much ice into the water. Let's say that we take all the houses in the United States. All right, we take them out there and throw them in the water, in the sea. And we do that, for example, 23 times. That is how much ice goes into our oceans every year. And this is just going on year after year after year. When that happens, of course, the biodiversity is changing. And the polar bears, I met 38 of these polar bears on Greenland and Spitsbergen. I was really close to this one, about 1.5 hours, 5 meters from it. And they're really interesting, but they look really like, but it's not good to go that close to them. You are definitely food in their eyes, but they are moving much, much north at all times. Greenland, let's say that if Greenland melts, the whole Greenland, all the oceans around the globe would rise about 7 meters. And that is still the small glacier. Antarctica is a big glacier. It's about 38 times bigger than Finland. 99.6% of Antarctica is covered with ice. And where I took this picture, the ice thickness was about 4.2 kilometers. It's so heavy, this piece of ice, that it have compressed Antarctica under the sea level, about 600 to 1,400 meters. And that is a big conflict over there. And let's say that look at the picture over here. The continent is pressed under the sea level, and then the sea is warming up. And the water goes under the glacier, and pieces will then disconnect from this glacier, and the sea level is rising. And of course, we knew this one, and we know that. So we thought, oh, what if we would go and have a look for ourselves and see how far it has gone and what is happening under the ice in Antarctica. So we put up an expedition called K080 together with the University of Helsinki and University of Auckland in New Zealand, and went down to Antarctica to monitor 4 different things. There's a lot of scientists on board, and we were 9 of us going out on the ice and put up a camp right about 80 kilometers south of Scott Base. And it was on the sea ice. And they had been there 7 years before, these same scientists. And at that point, the sea ice had been 7 meters thick. They drilled holes in it and went down to dive and see what's happening on the bottom, and did several kind of researches down there. And here you can see a picture taken from below the ice. And when we drilled the holes over there, it was only 3.5 meters thick, which meant that there's quite a lot of sunlight penetrating this ice. You can actually see in the picture, the dark dots are our tents that we slept in. And then there's more plankton and more food, and then much more animals. 7 years ago, there hadn't been any animals at all on the bottom. Now, when the scientists went down and came up and said, this is crazy, there was hundreds and thousands of animals on the bottom of the Antarctic Sea over there. And here you can see one of the research we did over there. There's domes. And the idea was to simulate the thing that what will happen to Antarctica if the waters are getting warmer. So which means that there will be more food, and then how the animals react to that food. So we put animals inside the domes and fed them some water, some food, and then studied them. The visibility was crazy in this part of the world. It's the clearest water you can find. The visibility was up to 500 meters. under the ice over there. You don't need any lights over there, so you can see very, very far away. The animals we saw were animals that we hadn't seen so much before over there. There were these starfishes, white ones like this. You had yellow and orange starfishes that was about in diameter about 60 centimeters. There were fishes over there, quite a lot of them actually. There were sea spiders that was about 50 centimeters in diameter, walking around at the bottom over there. You had these tennis balls, quite a lot of them actually, dropped around the seabed over there. You had these long worms, about 1.5 meter, this thick white worms over there. You had bunnies over there. They didn't jump around over there, but they were there. This all had come in 7 years. The scientists thought that Antarctica will change in about 100-year cycles. This had happened in 7 years. So it's changing rapidly at the moment, and we need to understand it to also be able to change much more rapidly. For you to, I filmed a video over there and editing in the tent over there. So I'm going to show it now. If you can please put on the video, so you can see what Antarctica looks above and under the ice over there. As you can see, the changes were rapid in yes, on the polar areas. And we sent out pictures from the tent over there. And I sent just one small picture of a sea star. And that, if you can put on the screen, so you can see this one over here, and from the tent. And when people understood, because the scientists over there, they wrote really hard things to understand, but when they understood that they need to really write text that everybody understands. Also the reporters that weren't science reporters, they started understanding what's cooking. So during 1 month over there, we got...
Tell me when we can start. Can we start now? Yes, we are on air and we are back in Glasgow, and I am joined now with two of my colleagues, Ina Parvanova from the UNFCCC and Jonathan Lynn from the IPCC. There are many C's there. I am very glad that you had the possibility and took the time to join me here. And I wanted to know if you could very briefly tell me what all the C's stand for in the names of your organizations. Maybe you start.
Thank you very much, Mary, and thanks for inviting us. A very interesting topic, very dear to our hearts. I'm sure I speak for many. UNFCCC stands for United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. It's a document that was created in 1992. Probably many people are familiar with the Kyoto Protocol and the Paris Agreement in particular. Those are critical steps in the evolution of the Convention on Climate Change. And as you know, our organization is responsible for the negotiation of the parties. That's why we organize together with the presidency these COPs. And yes, we're here hoping to find a way to implement the Paris Agreement faster.
And Jonathan, how about the IPCC?
Yeah, so no surprise, the CC is also climate change. The IP bit is the Intergovernmental Panel, and indeed we're actually an organization of governments formally. Our members are governments. And our job is to look at all the science that is produced about climate change every year, the thousands and thousands of research papers, and then give a kind of overall assessment, tell policymakers, and it's policymakers, governments that are our main audience, this is what the scientific community knows about climate change. So we give a kind of update on the state of knowledge.
And most people who are interested in climate change actually very well know of your reports. The IPCC reports is what every journalist, at least in the world that is interested in climate change, is waiting for and communicating when they come. I wanted to mention, because I didn't earlier, that the theme of our discussion now is scaremongering or hope. How should we communicate climate? And that is something that's very close to the heart for both of you. And actually, the first question that I have is what specific challenges are there to communicating climate change broadly? Will you start?
Shall I start off on that? Yeah. Well, I mean, there are a few. So, firstly, like a lot of technical subjects, it's a very complicated technical issue. So how do you get this across to non-specialist audiences? That's a big challenge, and we give a lot of thought to that. We're making progress, but a lot of work to do. And also, and this is changing, but in the past, for a lot of people, climate change was a distant problem. It was happening on the other side of the world to them, and for future generations. How do you make that seem relevant to people now? Actually, sadly, or maybe in terms of action, fortunately, but in any case, people now realize that this is a problem we have to face with now and here, wherever we are, and that makes the communication a bit easier, actually.
What would you say, Ina?
I would just echo what Jonathan is saying, but add that in addition to the challenges of communicating science, we also have the political aspects of communicating science, because while you can communicate the science without the political aspects, you cannot communicate the political perspectives without understanding science. So we're in it together. I also want to add that we also have a huge responsibility in communicating climate change because we need to find this good balance between fear, but at the same time hope. And if you do only one without the other, it becomes unbalanced. It becomes either whitewashing or it becomes scaremongering, as you said. So we have a serious task.
What works better, if I ask it like that? I mean, if you think about reach, every journalist, every communicator wants the highest possible reach for the information that you have. Is scare or hope better if you want to reach as many as possible?
Well, obviously you can get the headlines very quickly if you focus on the scare, and people do tend to sort of focus and zoom in on that. But you mustn't exaggerate that, otherwise the credibility of the science gets undermined very quickly. So. Don't hide the bad news. Don't underplay it. You've got to make people aware of what the problem is, but don't exaggerate it. And there's no need to exaggerate it. It's bad enough. But we all know that if you just tell people, the doom and gloom is coming our way, that's not going to work. You need to motivate people and empower people to look for the solutions, and the science indeed looks at the solutions as well. And so the message of hope, not false hope, but a realistic hope, is very important. And indeed the negotiations are part of that.
Yeah, Mary, maybe I just wanted to quote a figure. According to University of Bath study, which was published in September this year, 75% of young people surveyed said that they saw the future as frightening. Many respondents around the world reported a deeply felt anxiety that negatively affect their daily lives. So we really need to find ways to mitigate that to the extent we can. You see many young people choosing not to have children. This is indeed.
So and this of course is not an issue about communicating. This is about really implementing what's being said, for example, here now, and what they are negotiating about.
Yeah.
But I think one important question here is false facts. Because we know that when you communicate and talk about climate, there are facts, and then there are facts that are no facts at all. What is, as you see, the responsibility of the fact owner to follow up on the discussion about the issues? For example, your IPCC reports, when you see that they are misquoted, what do you do?
Well, we could talk about this all day, and it is a challenge. But, if we see that something is factually misrepresented, then we do go out and correct it. Obviously, if people are discussing the policy options, that's not so fact-based, and people are entitled to different opinions. But it's very clear that you might be entitled to a choice of opinions, but not to a choice of facts. And so we do. And I might come back to this later, but we are not the only people who are talking in this space. We rely on many other organizations and civil society and scientific institutions to pick things up when they see that misrepresentations are out there. Other people will push back as well. And you know, it's important. It's not, funnily enough with us, it's not just about the science that we have to be careful. When I introduced myself at the beginning, I emphasized that we're an organization of governments, because even recently we saw from some quite reputable news organizations, to my surprise, they were accusing us of letting governments lobby to change our reports. And no, as I said, we're an organization of governments, and we explicitly invite governments to comment on our reports as they're being prepared, to ensure that those reports are fit for purpose. So it was a misunderstanding and a factual misrepresentation of how we work. So that's important too.
Yeah. But now you were saying that also others, other than you, can correct false information when it gets out. But how do you actually correct things when we know how internet works? A small snowflake might very, very easily turn into a huge snowball. What do you do?
It is very difficult, and we know from communication science that it's not simply enough just to say, no, that's wrong, these are the facts. It's really a case of perhaps not so much addressing the errors, but constantly pushing out the correct information in compelling ways that will work with different audiences. And of course, social media is not just a problem, it's also a great asset in that sense.
I would just add that relationship building is critical, because we work with so many non-party stakeholders, which is NGOs, intergovernmental organizations, UN organizations, and we are all in this together. And as Jonathan say, we rely on them also to correct and amplify the correct message.
Do you feel, especially you haven't been with the UNFCCC so long, but you have been working with this for quite a long time. Can you see a change in how climate is being handled out there?
Yeah, I can see a very clear change actually, and a very, very positive one. Twofold and related. So firstly, there's just much more public awareness of climate change, and people know about it and they want to know more. They're keen to have the information. That's very good. And it's from being something that many media didn't bother with, was they thought it was of no interest, or politically it was a toxic subject and couldn't be touched. Now everyone is talking about it. So we've really, I think, passed the turning point there, which is helpful. And secondly, when I first started about 10 years ago, there was a big concern about people who were just denying the facts of climate change. And that was, I mean, there are still people out there, but that has really faded away from the general discourse. Most people accept it's happening, and there's a problem, and it's we're involved with it, and we can fix it. But the problem of deniers has really gone away, although the fact that there's now so much public interest and discussion about it means that some of those denier arguments are kind of resurfacing in social media rather than the mainstream media.
Yesterday, we were talking briefly in the evening, and you said that one of the challenges is also that in the discussions about what's happening, for example, here, lots of acronyms are used, and it's very, very hard for someone that doesn't sit at the negotiations table themselves to really understand what's going on. How can these things be simplified a bit?
Thank you, Mary. Yes, that's my challenge as well, sitting in meetings and very often trying to understand what the HLCs are doing on the GCA and so on. And it's really totally a challenge, but at the same time, I think that we are very consciously trying to move away from that. I think part of it is that experts are the audience are very different, and the experts are trying to talk to other experts, and I think in the interest of time, they just keep using, this type of jargon. Beyond that, I think the other challenge is that we are trying to communicate very conceptual terms. And, when you say means of implementation, does everyone understand what we're talking about? Or even adaptation? I mean, those are pretty big terms. And the challenge is, how do we explain, and should we explain necessarily if that is not relevant to the more general audience? So that's sometimes our internal battle.
Yeah, I mean, can I add to that? Because I absolutely agree with Ina, and we're trying to move away from all these abbreviations and acronyms at least in our communications work. But it goes beyond the abbreviations, even it's the terminology as well. And we had a study done for us by the University of Southern California, Dornsife. It was presented at an event yesterday. There's some amazing things about the jargon where we would think these are perfectly normal terms that we use all the time in discussing climate change, which are misunderstood by a general audience. And for instance, adaptation, which is a key term in climate change, it's about adjusting to the changes that are happening. A survey was done of people. They thought it was about turning a book into a movie. Right, that's what an adaptation is.
Yes.
Sustainable development. Well, that must be about real estate, right? And this is a really, really challenging. On the positive side, when we launched a report a few years ago, the 1.5 degree report, we were tearing our hair about how we're going to communicate the idea of net zero. And now I see all over the advertising in Scotland and on the trains, we're doing net zero and help us with net zero. So some of these things can work, but you have to be very careful and sometimes think outside your jargon box. How is this going to be understood by the wider public?
Yeah. Now, let me see. We should be joined now with two persons, and there we have them, Silja Wennerström and Meral Jamal. I hope you can hear us. Yes, you can. Welcome. You're participating, both of you, in a program on fact-based climate journalism as part of the Nordic Canadian cooperation project Nordic Bridges. I hope you've heard our discussion here. I'd like to hear your comments on what you've heard so far. Would you like to start, Silja?
Yeah, hey, my name is Silja Wennerström, and I'm a journalist with the Nordic Canadian Youth Fellowship in Environmental Journalism. Sorry, I haven't spoken English in quite some time now. I was thinking about how if we focus on the problem, what does our future look like when we are young readers and we keep up with the environmental and we keep up with environmental journalism, and we have to always read these Reach headlines stories. I'm sorry, it's a bit.
It's not a problem. Just continue.
The young readers have to live with these Reach headline stories, but they don't really have a clear picture on how the future looks like. How do you think we should paint that picture for them. I mean, it's very hard to be it's hard to be like motivated and care about things when you don't really see any solutions. And yeah.
Okay, Silja, I think that's a very good question, and I think we touched upon it a little bit already earlier, the need for communicating hope also. How could we help, or you actually help journalists that want to communicate hope also, and not only disaster to people out there?
Yeah. Well, I think it's a really great question, and the fact is we don't know what the future looks like either. And if you look at our reports, we're looking at a series of possible futures. This is very, very difficult for journalists to deal with, because they want to say, the report says this is what's going to happen. And instead we're saying, if we do this, then this may be the future. If we do that, then that's going to be the future. So I think the way it has to be presented in the media is, it's our choice. It's up to us. These are the options we have, and this is how we can determine our future. It's not out of our control. These are the actions we can take if we want a future like that. Or if we take these actions, this is what we'll get. And again, this fits in with very much with the negotiating process.
Yes. I think that it's also a question of balancing, as we were talking earlier, between the science and what can be done. What can governments do, and what can each of us individually do? Unfortunately, our mandate as UNFCCC does not allow us to tell young people to go and do something specifically and urge their government to take particular action. But we certainly can do so many things individually as a non-party stakeholders.
Meral, do you have, just a second, Silja, I'll get back to you, but I'll let Meral in as well.
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, thank you guys for taking the time to speak with us. I'm curious to know if there are parallels in how we've reported on the pandemic, just because some of the challenges have been shared. False information has been a big issue during the pandemic, especially in the case of the vaccines and their efficacy. Also, the science has been very difficult to communicate. From a journalist's perspective, I think that there are parallels between how we have done things or reported during the pandemic and how it might help us in reporting on the climate crisis. And I just wanted to know if you guys have any thoughts on that.
Good question.
Yeah. I mean, the two are very, very similar. Though I would say that climate change is more complex, but one of the big similarity is that lots of people were warning about pandemics, and nobody was taking any notice. Then it started to happen, and a few people said, "Oh," and then, oops. What are we going to do about this? And then suddenly all the measures to deal with this, and how is that happening? And a lot of misinformation coming out there. So for sure, people in future IPCC assessments will be looking at how the pandemic happened and what lessons can be learned for handling climate change. It's probably a bit too early to say, although our latest report and the reports coming out in the next few months start to look at that. But it's a very interesting parallel that you raise.
Ina, you had a comment also.
Yes, I just wanted to say that excellent question indeed, because we are actually looking at partnering with WHO and developing similar tools to address misinformation, because there is so much technology nowadays that can help us, and we don't have to reinvent the wheel. But yes, the pandemic has been an unfortunate but really a learning experience.
We have a question or a comment from Helsinki as well. Andrea, are you with us now? I can see you at least. No, but we can't hear you. And let's see if we can hear you if we put on this. No, we cannot hear you. No, now we can.
Now we can.
Now?
Yes.
I'm glad. Well, it's been really interesting following this discussion in Glasgow, and with me here on stage I have Jonathan Brink, Benjamin Brink, I think it was. But anyway, when you listen in on this discussion, do you feel that there is scaremongering you hear, or is it just fact-based?
I don't think it's as simple as setting it up as if it's scaremongering or
try this.
fact-based.
We hear you very poorly. Put the mic as close as you can.
What about now?
Yes, much better.
Okay, so I don't think it's as simple as saying it's either scaremongering or just fact-based. I want to say that I'm happy in some way that the discussion has moved away from if climate change is real. Like we've finally moved away from that. But to some extent, I would actually say that from a political perspective, it's often about what are we willing to do rather than what do we need to do. And in that sense, I would say it's actually a soft way of framing this issue, because I'm not saying that we need to scaremonger more, but we're perhaps also not saying what is it actually that we need to do, what is the transition, what would it actually mean for our own citizens. And in that way, maybe it needs to be diversified. How are we actually framing it?
So you are thinking focus on the solutions rather than the current situation, or?
It's not only about the solutions, because part of it is also giving it human aspect. As we were saying, perhaps with the pandemic, one of the reasons why there was so much support from a political level to sort of make changes was people could feel it on their own bodies. They could see it within their communities, within their friendships. And maybe to some extent, at least here in the global north, we are not feeling it to the same extent on our own bodies. So maybe part of the framing should be to have a more inclusive perspective, to understand some of the changes that are already happening in the global south. And I know this is very painting it with a very broad brush, but sort of saying what is it actually that it means when this happens, and what does it mean for us as citizens of these countries.
But you also had a comment for the communication people in Glasgow.
Yes. So I was thinking, to what extent is the IPCC actually thinking about the way in which their reports are being framed? Because some of this can be framed in an old logic of this is the pain that we have, but it can also be framed in a logic of what are we gaining by making this transition? And a sub-question of that is, are there any institutions that are sort of studying how to frame climate change in a way that it actually gains public support?
Okay, so we have two questions here, actually both for Jonathan.
Okay, well, yeah, we're giving a lot of thought to how it's framed, and I think this report, where we have the first part coming out in August and then the next two parts coming out in February and March, that is very much framed around solutions. And even the Working Group 1 report, the physical science basis report that came out in August, which traditionally laid out the problem for the other two reports to look at the solutions. Now, even that was pointing to how we can use our knowledge of climate change to build better risk and impact assessments and make more resilient communities, how we can use more regional information for that, how we can not just look in the rear view mirror at what's happened, but get a better understanding of what's coming in the future. And the other two working group reports coming in the next few months will also be much more solutions focused. And I think the whole report is structured around that. And again, that comes back to this discussion about the message of hope, because it does give that sort of empowerment aspect to it. I can't remember what the second question was.
Oh no, the second question.
Framing. It was about framing.
It was about framing.
Yeah.
No, it was actually about if there are any institutions, again, that sort of are studying how to frame climate change in a way that it gains the public support.
Yeah, well, I'm not an expert on this myself, but actually we had an event yesterday with various communication scientists who have just published a whole special issue of the journal Climatic Change devoted to IPCC communications. It was very interesting reading for us, and a lot of them are looking at just that. How do we make sure that the IPCC is speaking to youth, to local communities in the global south? How do we make sure it's not just a one-way thing of the IPCC talking to the world, but how do we make it a two-way process that we hear from them too and incorporate that in our preparation, and so on. There's a lot of scientific work going on in there. So look out for that special, it's called the topical collection of climatic change. You'll find a lot of relevant material there.
Thanks for that answer, and thank you for a good question, Benjamin. And I actually think we had, I promised Celia that you could ask one more question, and we have time just for that. So Celia, please, now.
I was also wondering how we should report when we're focusing on like the small individual problems. For example, this is just an example, like plastic shopping bags are bad for the environment, but reusable shopping bags are bad for the environment because they leave CO2 emissions when they are manufactured. And then you're like stuck, then you don't know which bag to use. Or like vegan food is good for the environment, but it's bad for the environment and transport, and then you're stuck again. And when you report like this, the conclusion is always that there's nothing that's really good to do, and why do anything at all? Like, how do you report it so there is a solution and not just like a
not just lots of bad, not a lot of bad. Bad. Yes.
Maybe, and I will ask Jonathan to comment on the science of this, but we're also constrained because a lot of that depends on national laws, national policies. And as an intergovernmental organization, as a consensus-based organization, we really cannot get into how each country regulates this. So communications-wise, we're somewhat constrained. At the same time, factually, environmentally, there's definitely some facts, and I would turn to Jonathan if, how do we communicate?
Yeah, well, it's an excellent question, actually, and I also agree with Ina, but we have to understand and respect the different national contexts that people are working in. But without giving a specific answer, I'd say that generally, a lot of these questions are more complicated than they seem at first sight. There's often not a simple answer and a simple solution, and that's why the science is so important, because it can look at all the implications of making the sort of changes you're discussing. What are the pros, what are the cons, are we better off or worse off doing that? If we do this, does it have a trade-off with another something else that we want to do? So the science is very, very important. We shouldn't just go for the simple, easy solutions. We need to really think about it and make sure we have a solid scientific evidence base for the changes and the solutions that we make.
Which is why these negotiations are so complex.
Yeah, and unfortunately, while you said that, just when you said something that was not very hopeful, it's 1 o'clock and we need to finish this because you both need to run. And I just want to say thank you very much once again for taking the time to come here. Thank you also to Benjamin in Helsinki and to Silja Wennerström and Meral Jamal, who joined us with good questions on Zoom. And to Andrea, of course, in Helsinki. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you. And we should move on. I say thank you to you. And we have our heads of delegation from Finland and Sweden who have joined us. You're welcome up, and we'll take a change here. Thanks. Thank you and welcome. Please.
Thank you.
So, a flying start here for the heads of delegation from the Finnish delegation, Mario Numelin, and Matthias Fromeri from the Swedish delegation. And the obvious question to you two is, how are things going?
Well,
you can take off the mask up here.
Exactly. Like this. Yeah, obviously today is a very important day, and I think that we can't fully say how things are going before we have the stock take by the presidency tonight. But I think it's already quite clear that there has been progress on many of the, let's say, more technical issues, and we're very happy about that. But as we already knew in the beginning of the week, there are many quite political issues which will continue to be negotiated next week, and which obviously also will go to the ministers.
Yeah, it's important that you have that.
Okay,
yeah.
And then I mean, obviously some of the big issues here are it's partly about the rule book to have a Paris Katowice rulebook finally agreed, so the market mechanism and the transparency framework, so these are really important. But then it's also big issues around finance, adaptation, and then obviously the so-called cover decision, which is the more political messages coming out of this COP. How do we keep the 1.5 within reach, and what kind of a roadmap can we agree on that process?
Yeah, Matthias, can you add something to that? Because then I need to get some more explanations about what you actually just said.
I think I'd share very much Mario's assessment that it's a bit difficult maybe to get a sense right now, because I mean, I'm co-chairing one of the negotiations. We're having a huddles, as they call it, that the colleagues are consulting among themselves. So we hope to be reaching a conclusion, but we're running on overtime already. I mean, we were supposed to be ready yesterday.
Okay, already
so
now.
we get sort of extended deadlines in order for the SB plenary to start at 6 o'clock tonight, and then, as Mario said, afterwards we will have then the presidency making this stock take of where we are ahead of ministerial consultations or ministerials during the course of next week. So hopefully, I mean, we have been seeing texts which have been arriving. Some texts have been agreed, but still some too many texts, I would say, are still outstanding.
When we have just been now for the last half an hour talking about communicating, for example, the results from this meeting and this conference, it's very complicated for people out there to really understand what it's all about, actually, because it's very complicated issues. What people do understand is this thing about the 1.5. That is clear and concrete. Are you hopeful when it comes to the 1.5 after what you've heard during the first week?
I think that after the World Leaders Summit, we did hear a lot of new promises and pledges, and we have now seen in the media already some estimations of how these new pledges might actually bring us to a path of below 2 degrees, and that would of course be really, really good. But of course this all is then depending on the implementation of those pledges. So maybe it's too early to say that yes, this COP will bring us to below 2 degrees somehow, but at least it's some hopeful signals that we're getting. There have been many initiatives which also are quite important, I think, for example, the methane pledge and so on. When it comes to the negotiations, I would agree that it's quite difficult to communicate very well what's actually happening, and there are so many issues. But I would maybe go back to the cover decision and maybe the messages coming out of that. I mean, these are going to be the most political messages maybe, and exactly how are we going to ensure that we all agree to being on this 1.5 path.
Do you have something to add to that?
No, I mean, one could maybe even say that I think, for us, if we're not hopeful about 1.5, who should be? I think that's part of my job description, to ensure that we deliver on 1.5. And of course, we see all the challenges, but also we're seeing the opportunities in climate action. I think just the space where we are right now, with all these pavilions and countries and actors showcasing the opportunities that they see in the transformation to climate neutrality. I think that's also kind of the messages which we want to put across, as Mario said, in the cover decision, which we want to see reflected in the action by parties as well. So definitely 1.5 is still alive.
That's good. Andrea, you could prepare, but I'm going to ask one more question, because we have had with us today here some of the youth delegates. And they were using a term that was youth washing. They said that they can be in the room and they can sit at the table, but they can't see their messages on the paper. Would you agree on that? Do you want to start?
Well, I think I can see where the term comes from. I mean, there's been talk also of greenwashing, that we are washing finance green. So I see where the term comes from. I would hope that within the Swedish delegation, the Finnish and the Nordic and the EU delegations, that we jointly are giving the space for young voices to actually be heard and recognized, and taken as being part of the decisions that we're taking forward. And we have 2 youth delegates in the Swedish delegation. So I can see that also at the same time young people are facing challenges in making their voices heard. But I would also be keen to hear, what can we do to make it even better for them or easier for them to access the kind of arenas where their voices can be heard.
Maria, do you want to add?
Not much to add. I also would like to say that we, of course, also have a very active youth delegate in our delegation, and that's been a tradition for a very long time. And we do actually discuss also the kind of the issues that are being negotiated here. So it's not only about her being part of the delegation and attending side events, but actually really kind of also being heard on the issues to be negotiated. But still, I'm aware that there might be kind of requests for even more involvement, and I think that's kind of legitimate from their side. I mean, this is.
Let's hear. We have my colleague Andre in Helsinki at our hub there. Andre, let's hope that we can hear you now.
Yes, I really hope so. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Thank you. Because we do have an audience here in Helsinki as well, and they have been paying close attention to what has been said from the negotiators. And I'm going to give the microphone to one of the key listeners here. Nina, go ahead.
Thanks. I just want to ask directly, do you recognize that youth washing is a problem?
That was a very clear question.
Very clear question. No, I mean, I personally, I must say that the term youth washing itself, I just heard recently. So, but as I said, I mean, I understand the term, and I take your point as well that if it is the case that young people are sort of being put in spaces but not listened to, that is a problem. Like any actors who are being put in a space and not listened to. I mean, the voices which are requesting to be heard, we of course should provide spaces to make them heard as well. So if it is the case that they are not listened to, it is definitely a problem, yes.
Do you have another question, Nina, or should we? Yep.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, so that you see that it's a problem, is it something that you're willing to act on and change so that we actually will have a say when it comes to implementing real decisions?
I would hope that we are trying to, in terms of making, when we hear not only youth voices but civil society voices at large not being able to make their voices heard, that is something that which we raise to ensure that we as a delegation are making those views known, and also sort of within our national system where we're trying to ensure the space and availability for young voices to be heard. So I do hope that we are trying our best, but obviously if we need to do more, and we're looking forward to having that kind of feedback as well.
What would you say, Maria?
Indeed, I very much agree with Matthias, and of course, I mean, we can always improve things and always kind of cooperate better and more with our youth, not only the youth delegates we have here, but also all the active youth that we have at our homes. And I just also wanted to say that I think we are talking partly about what's happening here at the COPs, but then also partly I would like to, for example, say that in Finland we have a roundtable on climate policy, which is chaired by our Prime Minister, and it's a kind of a stakeholder body, and a youth delegate is actually co-chairing it, and that's always going through all the kind of key climate policy issues. So I think that there, for example, they have a very strong voice in
Okay, I can see that we have one more question from Helsinki, and then
Yes.
we need to let our heads of delegation go because they need to eat.
Of course. I'm just curious, is there sometimes so much strategy involved in these negotiations from the individual countries that it actually hampers the negotiations, and it hampers that the talk can be brought forward? An extension of that, maybe to avoid that, what are you doing to stay in tune and to stay in line with the civil society as negotiators?
I'll be happy to start. I mean, we had a meeting with Swedish civil society organizations, I think it was the day before yesterday. We'll be having one again next week when the minister arrives, and we have civil society meetings regularly throughout the year. And then also with our two youth delegates who are sort of representing civil society in the delegation, I hope that we, through them, also get continuous feedback from civil society organizations on sort of their sense of where the negotiations are. Again, as Mario said, we can always improve, but I hope that we're sort of putting a framework in place where we have that possibility.
And from our side also, we have several civil society representatives in our kind of official delegation, and we of course, have regular delegation meetings, and we're also meeting them bilaterally to discuss, and at least I would hope that that's in a way, considered sufficient, but again, I'm always happy to hear more kind of recommendations of how we can improve this.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Helsinki, and thank you very much, Mario Numelin and Matthias Frumeri. We really appreciate that you took your time. I hope you will be coming back during the next week.
We hope so too.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
And now I'm giving the word back to Helsinki because we are having, actually the end of the talk show is here, I think. Yes, and I can see that we have our next moderator getting ready. Daniel, you are there, and I'll give you the floor now. You can present your team and your guests, and I'll stay here.
Yes, very good. Thank you so much, Mariam. So, welcome to the last discussion of this climate action talk show. It is a discussion arranged by the Nordic Culture Point Corporations with the Nordic Talk events and that podcast series. So the focus of our program is the role of culture and arts in the green transition. From this conversation, we have a panelist joining both here in Helsinki and also at the Nordic COP26 Pavilion in Glasgow. My name is Daniel Rey, and I will be leading this conversation together with my co-moderator, Mary Gastrin in Glasgow, as you just introduced me and I introduce you. So let me start to introduce our guest. Our first guest here in Helsinki is Taru Elving. Taru, curator, researcher, and your writer based in Helsinki. And I would like to hand over quickly the word to Mary in Glasgow. Mary, would you like to introduce our guest in Glasgow, please?
Yes, we're trying to arrange our chairs here, so it's a little bit chaotic, but I will, as soon as I have found my papers. I have Emma Turkki here. You are a UN delegate to the Danish, youth delegate to the Danish delegation. And then we have you, Rosanna, and as I did not find my papers, I can't remember your last name, but you are from the British Council, and I can see that it is Lewis. You're very welcome, and I'm so glad that you're here. And we will be having a dialogue with Daniel and Taru that is in Helsinki.
Hello. Very good. Thank you so much. Thank you, Rosanna, and thank you, Emma, for being over there in Glasgow and joining this conversation with us. As previously said, today's discussion will be about the role of arts as a communicative element that is able to guide us through a landscape of information, statistics, emotions when tackling the climate change. In other words, what is the role of the arts when as a creative force for the sustainable future we urgently need? Because we are indeed reaching that climate Rubicon. Taru Elving, let me give you the first question, and I think it's a question that we need to explain and re-explain to ourselves. And so the first question is, why do we need to talk about the relation between climate change and the arts? And if society needs to change, what is the significance of the arts in the front line of the climate change?
Thank you. That's a question and a half. So of course, dealing with something as complex as ecological crisis.
If you can't hear, please put these on.
Not only climate, but also the kind of biodiversity crisis and all the interconnected ecological urgencies. This is also something that is cause for system change, and it's a cultural change that we're looking at. And the arts, of course, are at the heart of that change when it comes to cultural change in its complexity. The stories, the kind of space-time for dealing with this change, and also quite practically tools for change that the arts can provide for the kind of a cultural transformations to happen. One thing that has been raised a lot in the discussions around the kind of dilemmas that we face, I guess, in how to actually move into action and to actually really implement what we already know that we need to implement in a way, is the sort of psychological disconnect between, for example, data and what's happening on the ground, or the kind of action that this calls for, and the kind of these local everyday actions and activities and their global impacts. There's a real detachment, especially I think somewhere like here up north in Northern Europe, where for many of us, we don't really experience the kind of those dramatic impacts of climate crisis, for example, yet. And so what the arts can do, they are actively doing, they're giving voice, they're witnessing, they're making visible different stories and touching people with these stories. They're drawing out differences in specific experiences of ecological crises, but they're also kind of pulling together those sort of shared experiences and perspectives. And in a way dealing with that polyphony, that kind of real complexity of also what's at stake for people and communities and ecosystems. And the arts are really actively also addressing these issues intersectionally, looking at those sort of colonial extractive histories that are very much still actively present today. They're bringing out those sort of micro histories that maybe are not part of the mainstream narrative. They're mediating at the same time between different knowledges, modes of knowledge, disciplinary knowledge, and local knowledge. And they're also kind of carving out that kind of space and time for us to engage with this complexity and the differences without having that pressure to resolve and to find a kind of solution always, but to really linger and take time to dwell in that kind of what we're actually dealing with. But it's not only in the level of content that the arts are really crucial, I feel. Arts are also really working towards change actively all the time. They, for example, carry culturally and ecologically specific and situated knowledge in their own practices. For example, here in the Nordic region, of course, the indigenous Sami population and the kind of arts and cultural practices there are really crucial for us to understand also as a real kind of alternative knowledge systems that kind of can open up different ways for us to think towards the future. The arts have always been envisioning alternative, different potential futures, whether dystopian or utopian, that kind of also experimenting with practices, with questions of like how do we relate in different ways to each other within human communities, but also the more than human sort of communities that we're part of. They're experimenting and developing different practices of care and repair, not only for preparing for future, but actually really actively repairing the present. And of course, the many methods in the arts are really focused on collective social change, emotional engagement with issues, developing and sort of really working towards empathy, for example, and expanding our capacities for empathy, and also embodied engagement with change that is really crucial. But also I think one thing that is really necessary today as well, and what the arts have been, I feel, that have been working more towards now, is also shifting the narratives and perspectives towards not only the sense of that we have to lose or sacrifice something, but the question of gain, of actually what is it that we can gain from this change and what can be really positive in the change.
What is it that we can gain to change that narrative? So then I would like to hand over the conversation, the dialogue to Glasgow. But just before you start to make the questions, Mary, to our dear delegates, Mary, would it be possible for you just to give us a small description of what is the conditions right now at the summit in Glasgow?
The conditions,
the working conditions, the environment. Are there any battles between the narratives, like Tara was mentioning here? Do we talk about what we have to give up, or do we talk about actually what we're gaining?
Actually, as so many discussions are going on in parallel here, there are that kind of discussions, but there are also very technical discussions in the negotiations rooms and so forth. So I think at the moment, now we are halfway through the conference here. At the moment, is quite hopeful. We just had the negotiators from Sweden and Finland here, and they are quite hopeful. They're a little bit stressed with time, but they were hopeful. And yesterday I had the opportunity to speak with some of our young delegates, and we will hear Emma here in just a second. And actually, I feel that even though there is a slight frustration, as I would describe it, that you still are not being heard enough, or at least in the implementation of what is being put on paper, you can't see yourselves. But there is quite a lot of hope still here. I'm sure we can get back to that later on.
Thank you, Mary. So, Emma, back in Glasgow, Emma, and also referring to what Taro was mentioning here, also that the arts can help us, to deal with our emotions, and also this cognitive gap between, statistics, emotions, and this kind of disorientation. So back to you, Emma. Our feelings about the climate change is something that needs to be taken into consideration. So, being a young, and in your case, being a young representative, what does it mean for young people? I mean, how do they feel about the climate crisis? I know we've been talking about this before. I've heard before the word youth washing, and I'm gonna repeat the same question. What is the emotions about the climate crisis? And if there are any kind of this kind of gap between generations, what is the role for the arts to make this gap less? Emma, back to Glasgow.
Thank you. Well, that was a nice and long question. Lots of different things to answer. Well, I would say, I think if you look at it in general, I think the youth are quite frustrated, unfortunately, with the climate crisis, but also the actions taken for it. It's going too slow. I think a lot of youth are very tired of being a part of trying to raise awareness against it, trying to do activism, and it still hasn't moved that far yet. And that's kind of the issues with politics and things, that you have to put a lot of money into really taking action. It goes quite slow. So I think when I am around here and I speak with the other youth delegates from Sweden and Norway and other countries, there is an overall frustration. And I think that you see that a lot in the activism that's done. If you look at, for example, Extinction Rebellion, who also use performance art a lot when they are trying to make points, it's very bound in pain and bound also in anger. There was just in Denmark 10 women who cut off their hair because they were giving their strength to the people who were making the decisions, and hair is a symbolism of strength and dignity and so on. So I think a lot of what you see youth participating in art and using art, it's very anger-based and based on sadness and a lot of complicated emotions. And you can see that very easily. But now you also talked about the cognitive gap. And for me, I think that is one of the biggest issues I meet when I'm out discussing with people about what to do with climate, because the youth are ready. They'll say, tomorrow, let's do it. Let's put all our money. They'll stop buying new clothes or stop flying. They'll just take trains. They'll do anything. But we see that the generations a bit older, their parents and so on, they're not as fast at moving at this. And I think also sometimes they take it quite personally, the youth's anger about their decisions and their parents' decisions and what has happened in their lifetime. So they kind of disconnect, and you just see that there's a gap between that generation and the younger, that they don't really understand each other totally. And as you said before, or Taro said, which I very much agree, arts and culture does appeal to our emotions and feelings, and I think we really need the people and the groups who are not connected yet to the climate crisis and the severity of it and what we have to do to connect to it. And that's where I really see a big hope in art. You've seen it also with art and other areas that have not had as much awareness before, like the migrant crisis, some of the amazing documentaries and movies that have been made of that, or some of the other racial issues. Art has really been able to create empathy and also spread it in society, so there has come action out of it. And that's what I hope will happen with climate crisis, because it's too late to not believe in climate crisis anymore or not take it seriously. it's 2021 and everyone needs to get on board, and we don't have time to wait. So I hope art can play that role, because it's super needed, and there are so many ways it could be done in. Yeah, that was my short
question. Short.
Trying to do it. Yeah. Trying to answer.
I get what I deserve. So thank you so much, Emma, and I would like to hand over the second question in Glasgow to Rosanna Lewis. Rosanna, as a representative of the British Council, what role can an international institution like the British Council provide for the arts in order to be a creative force that supports the transition on a global and local scale? And I need to add another question to that. What is the consequence if we don't include the role of the arts in these kind of strategic conversations about climate change? Rosanna, back to you.
Thank you, Daniel, for this. Thank you, Daniel, for this question. I mean, British Council is the UK's international organisation for cultural relations, and what our role is to do is to build trust, understanding between the UK and countries overseas. And the way that we do that is through arts and culture, education, and the English language. So for us not to look at climate change as a global issue that has local resonance in the over 100 countries that we operate in would be madness. And I think COP26 has really driven our agenda in the British Council, and we now have a global programme called the Climate Connection that does exactly what you're saying here. So it takes the strengths of the expertise and the networks that we have in the education field, in arts and culture, and in English and language teaching it more broadly, and looks at what can we offer and how can we encourage more connections, more collaboration, and more action on the ground towards addressing climate change. So I'll just mention our work in the arts and culture specifically. We've been looking at global challenges through the Missing Pillar report that we recently published on culture's contribution to the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And it looked across our examples of track record and case studies. And one of the recommendations was, you're not doing enough for climate. And they were right, you know. We had a lot of programming in climate change 10 years ago, and we've reinvigorated it now with the Climate Connection, and I'm so proud to say that we have 17 creative commissions that are doing really powerful work on arts, science and digital technology. Each project is unique and different. They're operating in over 30 countries with 70 partners, and really taking action on the ground with young people, with indigenous communities. There's projects going out to listen to melting glaciers in the Himalayas and working with communities on their oral traditions and preserving those. There are projects on planting tree graffiti that is visible from space and raising awareness about the importance of our trees for our biodiversity, but also for preserving the land. So those are just some examples of the projects that we're supporting. And I think the consequences, if we don't see arts and culture as part of that solution to climate change, is that we will lose reflections on our world. And as Taru was saying, those moments for thought, deep thought and engagement with this subject. We will lose the sense of empowerment and action that we can gain from engaging in arts and cultural activity, but also witnessing it and having our awareness raised through the work that we are witnessing. And there's a lot of hope in arts and cultural work because they're looking at innovative solutions, creative solutions. And the doom and gloom that we can hear regularly in the climate change space can be reinvigorated, and you can feel it's relevant to you and there's something you can do about it as an individual, as a collective, and eventually try and influence your national governments and the world to take action.
Emma had a comment here.
Yeah.
Please, Emma.
Thank you so much. Well, I was just thinking, because I agree, like, hope is really, really important to have when we're facing such a big crisis. Like, if we don't have hope and we start giving up, we will never reach the goal. But another thing is that if you actually think about the climate change crisis, it is 100% a result of the culture we've been having and how we act and how we live our lives. and how and so on. Like our whole culture is actually a result, or is resulting in the climate crisis. So therefore, it is so extremely important that we use culture and art and to change it. Because if we don't change our culture, we will never be able to become the sustainable societies that we want to have, and we need to have if we're going to survive in the future. So it's absolutely essential. But the question is, how do you drive a culture change? And how do you drive a change that will be so transformative that we will be in a whole other place and we will actually stop this crisis? Like, that's the big question for me. And I think we have to use every tool in the toolbox: art, music, politics, literature, everything. And it's just super important, and we better start now.
Rosanna wanted to comment as well. Do you want to take in
Yeah.
Taru in between?
Yes, I would like to take back the word to Helsinki just for a moment. But because I find it so interesting, you've been speaking about hope in Glasgow. Tara, you were speaking about different futures. For me, they sound very similar. Any comments about hope and the role of arts of creating that hope?
But yes, I think it can definitely have a really crucial role, because it is a question of imagination, and also I think there's the kind of the cultural crisis, the ecological crisis, the cultural crisis, like the author Amitav Ghosh writes. It's a crisis of imagination, and I think that's the kind of, we need these alternative different narratives in order also to have hope, and I think that's also expanding from a particular kind of apocalyptic kind of future scenario. There's a kind of determinism of the kind of linearity of time, and this that we are being taken to the brink, in a particular narrative, which is obviously true. That is the kind of where we are leading, heading towards now. And but thinking about the hope, I think really crucial for that is also the diversity of narratives and alternatives.
Yeah.
And that's actually one thing that I was thinking of when listening to the work, the really important work the British Council is doing, was also a question of a sharing of resources, in the same way as at the climate discussion where it's being discussed, that there's a real need to also share resources for different communities and countries to be able to move towards the kind of sustainable future, of sustainable futures also, and kind of really taking into account those sort of specificities in each context. And I think that's really crucial in the work in the arts too. But how do we share our resources in a way that is not just the mainstream sort of institutions and the kind of the wealthiest institutions who actually determine how arts can engage with climate crisis and be activated in that? And how do we recognize a kind of broader spectrum of the contribution of the arts? For example, in relation to activism, as Emma was saying, it's really crucial how artists have actually been always historically part of different cultural transformations and sort of rebellions also, and revolutions, in complex ways. But these are also specific, and we need to have different strategies in different cultural and ecological contexts. And I think there's a real challenge for us now is also how do we really spot that and recognize all of those potentialities that are out there.
Do you think, and also a question just back to you, Tarek, a quick answer is possible, then back to Rosanna and also to Emma. Today I've been listening to the conversation we've been having here during the day, and it's been really, really interesting, but we also been hearing a lot of data which is necessary and is good, but sometimes there is a kind of a gap again between me and the data. What role can the arts have in order to facilitate that kind of communication from data to you as an individual? Tara, first to you and then to Glasgow, please.
I would say that there's also, again here, there's a negotiation, somehow a kind of mediation between data and very specificities in different contexts and environments. What are the impacts? How my actions here are impacting, the world in very complex different ways. The data kind of universalizes and standardizes things too. And I think there's the arts, the strength of the arts is really kind of also grounding us, taking us back to the kind of specificities in really complex material conditions and also lives and how they're being impacted. And I think that's one really crucial role for the arts, is really to mediate that, so that this So particular kind of universalizing, standardizing tendencies can be also kind of challenged in a way, and then brought back to something quite concrete and something that we can relate to on a sort of human level, even when our lives and situations are very different.
Thank you, Taru. Back to Glasgow, any reflections about my question between the data and also the emotions and the role of the arts with it? Rosanna, would you like to start?
Yes, thank you. So picking up on what you're saying here, I mean, the data doesn't have a human face, but the results of that data does have a human face and a natural face as well. And so if we're able to show that and give voice to the people that actually will suffer from the climate crises and the different emergencies that we're trying to address here, then it brings it to life, it makes it relevant to people. And one of our projects, we had a film screening last night of 9 Earths, which has worked with Professor Mark Maslin, who's written How to Save Our Planet, The Facts, and it uses those facts juxtaposed with human stories and of their daily lives and quotes from how they're feeling about climate change and what their carbon footprint is and what their daily decisions are in a beautiful way with some music. And it tells a story that immerses you into people's lives and makes you really reflect on what do you think about climate change and what is my daily carbon footprint. And I think that's just an example of how you can bridge the gap between data and people, and arts and culture has a really powerful way of doing that. And that's coming back to your previous question around how do we make this happen beyond, what role is there for international organizations like ours? It's really to work in partnership and to appreciate the local situation and take a people-centered approach to the solutions, especially when we're talking about arts and culture. As I think Taru and Emma have said, it's not a scientific issue alone, it's really a human issue, and culture is part of who we are and what makes us tick. So if we can address and have this cultural shift to be more conscious, to feel more empowered, then there will be more change. But we have to do it in partnership with scientists, with decision makers, with academics, so that we're all in it together and we all have a role to play.
Yes,
please. Emma, would you like to comment?
Yes, I would love to comment. There's a few things I like more in this world. But I actually really liked what all of you guys are saying, because I actually was a part of this sustainable festival here in September in Denmark. And what I really enjoyed the platform that they created was that they took scientists and they took data, and then they created different kinds of art installations where people could actually see and feel the impact of their culture and their consumption. There was, for example, you could try to carry the weight of the amount of clothes that you consume every year, like a normal person. And I think that is really important to make this different kind of communication, because most people cannot understand this super complex climate issue. Even though I have a degree somewhat in it, there are some parts of it, like ocean acidification, that's so technical that even I can have a hard time understanding it. And I think sometimes that's what we take for granted when we're talking about climate, and especially at a place like COP, where there's so many experts together, is that we do forget that we're not all experts in every field. Yeah. And that's really where art and culture is so important, because it can help communicate these really technical things in a much easier way so people can relate to it. Because, like I said earlier, to be honest, I find it the biggest issue both with the biodiversity crisis and the climate crisis is that people cannot relate to it. Like, they don't understand it in the way. And when they do, like, it becomes too overwhelming for them to be like, what can I even do? Like, what can my part be in it? And therefore, I hope that culture and art will start focusing more on it. I know in Denmark there's also a company that works with theaters to help them make more climate-related productions. But I just hope that it will be used more, because it's really necessary, to be honest. Like, it's too hard. Researchers are not the best at communicating, and they need help.
That's a fact. If you allow, Daniel, I'll just add that we had a discussion earlier here today where the head of communications from the IPCC told us that they had done research that showed that many people think that the word adaptation, that is very commonly used when you talk about climate, they think actually that it means adapting a text into a film. And if you think about it that way, it just gets completely incomprehensible. So for me, that really is a way of telling that what you're saying now, that we need new means to communicate this in order for people to understand what it's all about, actually. Daniel, back to you.
New means. Thank you, Mary. I take that, new means and adaptation. And I've been thinking also when listening to us that we're speaking, on the one hand, we're looking and searching for this kind of universal narrative that, put us together in these planetary boundaries. We need that, and we are communicated in this language, English. I was noticing, Rosanna, when you were saying trust UK overseas and through the English language. And on the one hand, I do welcome that we're able to have this kind of conversation with this language. It gives us a united frame. On the other hand, Terry, you were also talking about these situated, experiences, and situated experiences requires other languages. Are you following me, Taro? Do we have like a contradiction? How do we approach to this communicative challenge where the arts can play and is playing a role regarding this?
I think that's a really big challenge, but it also kind of reflects the challenge that we have between the kind of realities of climate crisis, ecological crisis, that we have planetary forces and changes taking place. We have very different, diverse, specific, located impacts, and the kind of sort of materializations of these changes that are happening. And it's really crucial that we understand both somehow, that we navigate between this sort of micro and macro scale. And so I think that somehow kind of is reflected also with the language question, that there is, you need often very local languages in really concrete terms to even understand what is changing in that ecosystem and what is changing in that culture and that community in that situation. But then at the same time, we need to somehow find ways of mediating between these two and creating a kind of, because that's also the only way that I can begin to comprehend my everyday actions and their impacts that have so complex different impacts through these planetary changes and processes. And again, here I feel that the arts have a really crucial role and potential there, because arts don't only work with language, of course. We have different arts that have very, very different methods and means to not just communicate, but actually also bring people together to share experience collectively and embodiedly, emotionally, through sound, through kind of performative arts, through visual narratives, and so there's actually a kind of there's a huge amount of different kinds of languages that are played that are not tied to the language, like English language, or we have other ways of communicating and sort of finding those, creating this sort of way of coming together around these questions.
And I'm bringing that, thank you very much for that answer. And I was thinking of the Swedish language. I don't know if it has been translated into the English or another language. It is klimatskam. Klimatskam, which is, how do you translate it? Like climate shame. Something that came from the very local context of Sweden, that we do travel too much. We do that. Rosanna, I would like to hand over the question to you, because you are native English speaking.
Yes, I am, yeah. So I think this question is something that we wrestle with all the time. How can we connect with people in different parts of the world in different languages? One of our creative commissions is called Living Language Land, and it shows 26 words for COP26 in the weeks leading up. And they are words that link people and nature, and they're dying languages. They're in dying languages. And so that project has made a huge effort to go out to communities, find interpreters, interlocutors, mediators that work with communities directly, for them to volunteer a word that means something to them, and then to translate that word and the meaning through poetry, through visual arts, through song, through film. And that's an example of the importance of language, but also the importance of mediators and these intermediaries. And British Council, as an international organisation that has connections in governments and on the ground with very local communities and partners working with those communities, we're in a way that mediator and provide a platform for the visibility, because otherwise you cannot hear those voices in the cacophony that there is around the world. And I think it's great to provide platforms such as this at COP26 for the voices of communities, but also of arts and culture. You know, that we're having this conversation here today is a huge achievement in the space of COP26 for me and for everyone. I think all these cultural partners that are striving towards recognizing the role that arts and culture can play for climate action.
Emma, would you like to have a small comment on these?
Well,
not necessary, not forcing you.
No, but I do, like, to be honest, this has been one of the events I've been looking most forward to, because I feel like it's such a important topic. So I'm really, really happy that it has been raised. Because also, as a person from a natural political science background, it's not my expertise field. But I do find it really, really important, and I really hope that starting the dialogue on how we can change our culture to culturally be able to meet the goals that we want to set for us to be able to survive the climate crisis. I feel it's important that we start talking about it now. So I'm just really happy to be a part of this dialogue, and that I was also allowed to participate, even though I'm not an expert, because I find that's really important as well in these dialogues.
Yeah. Definitely.
Well, thank you very much, Emma, about that reflection, because I think that's the point of the arts and culture, you know, of including all these different voices and experiences and emotions through different, you know, not just the language itself, but like you say, Tara, we can communicate it through sounds or bodies, you know. So definitely, we've been speaking till now very much what the arts can do for society in this great need for transition. I call it the climate Rubicon. We're going to that Rubicon. But I would like to talk, Taru, about what can the society do for the arts in order to keep going, to be that kind of creative force, that, you know, helps us to transcend what we've been talking about, the role of the arts. So what can the society do for the arts?
Because society is maybe quite a broad term, maybe more if you think of just what kind of support in a way maybe arts needs in order to be able to be part of this work together with other disciplines. There's a number of things, of course, that I would like to emphasize, starting from the kind of the crucial question that we need to also recognize that the arts institutions, structures, and practices within the arts are not just the kind of the solution, but also part of the problem. That we are also kind of part of the same systems. We're dependent on same economic structures and cultural structures in complex ways that are also unsustainable in many ways. And so there needs to be also change, ecological transformations and transition, green transition happening in the arts itself. And that needs to be supported and recognized on different levels. Also, when you referred earlier to this climate, flight shame, there's the kind of tendency still in a lot of discussions to individualize in a way that responsibility is something that I think in the arts it's really crucial that there's also institutional structural change, that institutions can take the responsibility of the shoulders of individual artists, because many artists also work very precariously and very kind of alone in a way, in many ways. So there needs to be that kind of structural change to kind of carry that responsibility and not expecting individual artists to be the ones who are kind of changing, you know, their art, you know, and to be more sustainable in different ways, or to feel that every artist needs to tackle climate issues, for example, in their work. It's also much more kind of an institutional change that can happen in the arts that then also connects more with this sort of work that is being done and is needed. Another thing is the plurality of approaches in the arts. There's really there isn't one solution or one transition that can somehow globally tackle what's at stake. In a sense, we need a multitude of different transformations happening in our societies, and also arts are really diverse and when we talk about arts, it kind of encompasses really, really different forms of art and practices. So the kind of recognition of that and the potentiality of these different practices and fields of the arts is really crucial. And then the kind of recognition of the specificity of these different cultural and ecological contexts is again something that that needs to be really emphasized again and again. How the practices are embedded and how do we support these practices that are really embedded in change happening globally. And then how do we then kind of connect? How do we connect these very locally embedded specific practices in the arts? Then how can we kind of allow them to connect with other practitioners regionally but also globally, so that we see the kind of really they can also work with those differences and also the shared issues. Because as I said, there's many artists are working quite alone and in isolation with these questions today. And there's also our structures in the arts are also often putting them in competition with their colleagues, rather than really sort of supporting the kind of collaboration and real collective efforts that are obviously only way forward is that we really need to commit to being in this together, but in different ways. And then the kind of one more thing is sort of long-term engagement, that within the kind of current very kind of outcome-driven project-based economy in the arts and in society generally, it's very difficult for artists and art organizations to develop some very long-term work that is slow and really deals with the complexities of issues at stake. The kind of pressure to produce new projects and so on is kind of works really against that aim to really work with the ecological issues in more in depth and in real complexity and more long term. So these are, I think, the key issues that I would like to raise here.
Thank you, Tara. I would like to hand over the word to Glasgow. Any reflections about what Tara mentioned here, please?
Yeah, Rosanna.
Yeah, I love how you flipped the question, Daniel, to us of, well, what can society do for the arts? You know, we're often asked, what can arts and culture do for climate change? And I think a lot of people are scared of the word arts and being an artist. But actually, if you look at our everyday lives, arts and culture is really part of every decision that we make. You know, what clothes are we going to wear? What are we going to eat? And what are we going to watch on our smartphones? And so I think we forget that we don't necessarily need to do a massive action to recognize the value of arts and culture. We just need to be more conscious of it and advocate for it in different circles. I think there's still the feeling of arts being an add-on to conversations, and wouldn't it be nice if this report had a pretty picture to go alongside it, or let's get a performer to come to our conference and do a performance, but it's not embedded in the conversation. And if we can encourage decision makers to listen to their communities, including artists, then there will be more powerful changes possible and more collaboration and mutual understanding between those different actors.
Do you want to comment on that, Emma?
Yeah, I do. I think what we can hear that's being kind of said in between the lines is funding and the lack of it. And in a way, I think it's something that can be related to a lot of different sectors where people do things voluntarily. Also being a youth, being engaged areas, I don't get any money for it, but it also hinders that very few people can do the role that I do. I can do it because I'm a resourceful youth and I come from a Western country where I have a good economic background for being a student. And I think that's also sometimes issues with artists.
Yes.
It really, really has a barrier for youth actually going after their dreams and doing these things, and also different kinds of artists just trying to live being artists. And I think that's quite sad. And I really wish that there was a better way of funding it. But I don't know, I'm not that close to so many sectors in culture, but I do know the music industry in Denmark pretty well. But it's also there, it's a history of underpaying people. It's like it's a part of the culture that you cannot be wealthy and be an artist. You have to suffer in some kind of way. and it just, it's a huge barrier, and it stops lots of cultural projects. And I'm just lucky that we still have anything left after Corona, to be honest. I was really scared for the culture institutions. So I hope that we will see in the future that we start valuing other aspects of our society that doesn't have just a monetary value as culture and as arts, that it will be valued more. The same with political activism, the same with art, with nature and other things. I hope that will change how we value things.
So, Daniel, back to you, I think.
Yes, thank you. And you, Emma, you really mentioned it. We're talking about funds. You just, hit it, and I couldn't, I cannot stop to make the question since we're speaking about funds. Is there a possibility that the arts also becomes reduced into a tool when it comes to the climate conversations we're having here? And if so, how do we avoid that kind of risk that can be, or maybe there is no risk at all? I would like to first hand over the question to Rosanna and then to Taru. Quick, please, Rosanna.
Yeah, I think in the arts, this is always a big debate. Are artists doing things for art's sake, or are we instrumentalizing if we say, we'll fund a project if it addresses climate change? The way that we designed the Creative Commissions was so open that it allowed space for an artist to identify themselves in the funding opportunity and to look at, okay, who do I want to work with on this? Who could I bring together, and how could I work with a scientist or a digital innovator that will be able to really amplify the work that I'm doing, or that I'd like to do, I'd aspire to do. And I think Taru said arts and cultural institutions are still not there in terms of how they operationalize their practices to be more sustainable and green. So having funding that has a target like that is broad enough to allow the art to flourish and come through, but provides that sense of direction and priority and raises awareness in itself, just because there is that funding opportunity, I think can only be a positive thing. The risk is, and I think we've mentioned it here, is that it's cyclical funding that happens. So you only have a project that's funded for 1 year, for example, and where does it go from there? I think what we've done with the Creative Commissions is really think about what's the legacy, how can we build partnerships and a network between the projects. This is the sort of next stage of our projects, so that they can connect with each other and keep the momentum of their projects going without it just falling flat at the end. And platforms like these, partnership opportunities for them to connect with others, to learn more about this subject and explore it further in their practice and potentially reach out to get further funding from other sources, is something that we can help to generate. But yeah, the sustainability question is always a big one, and obviously, are we instrumentalizing or not? And I believe that you can use art as a tool without it being a dirty word, as long as it's done in an ethical way and a people-centered way that appreciates the art for art's sake, as well as the people behind it who will be part of the process, so it's not just output focused.
Thank you, Rosanna, for that. Taru, would you like to finalize this question?
Well, there's quite a lot to say, but I'll try to be brief. I guess the first thing is, I'll go back to that sharing of resources. I think this is a really kind of crucial question. How do we share resources globally? Also in the arts as well as in other areas of societies. That's one thing, from the kind of wealthy parts of the north, there's a real need to also us to share more, to allow for different kinds of voices to actually really come through in the global discussions as well in the arts. Other thing is experimentality and the kind of creative practices at best definitely don't have a clue what the outcome might be, and so there needs to be trust in the kind of arts to actually do something to really make change and to work with these issues and to really open up something that is not predefined. And I think that's a really crucial thing when it comes to what kind of projects or practices are being supported. That there has to be the kind of support has to expand from what is already recognized as work that engages with ecology, for example, or how within our arts institutions we recognize the kind of value in the arts. That there has to be a real thinking of how can the arts, how can we recognize the different kinds of practices that are emerging, are the kind of ones that might be taking us into very different, new, exciting territories, and also working in very different ways with the society and the different disciplines that maybe challenge our notions of what the arts actually are today in this particularly, now talking from a very particular Northern European context. So these are the two things that I would really like to emphasize.
Thank you so much for that, Taru. Well, Mary, Rosanna, and Emma over there in Glasgow, our time is running out, like it says up here, somewhere around me. Don't have time. I would like to talk about time, the whole curatorial issue about time. We'll take that conversation for another time. Anyway, thank you so much, Mary. Thank you so much, Emma and Rosanna. Good, and thanks on behalf of the Culture Nordic Point. And of course, to all of you artists, remember there is the Nordic Culture Point is also administrating 4 Nordic multi-grant programs for culture. So once again, thank you so much, Taru, for being here. Thank you and goodbye to you again in Glasgow, here in Helsinki, and to everybody out there in the world wide. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. You never know when you can start.